Hello and welcome to Front End Horse Live. How's it going, everybody? We've got Kevin Powell with us today. It's a good day. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Always good to have you on. I think this is your we got the confetti going already. I'm loving it. This is your third time on. You joined us once for Subgrid, right? You did and we kind of have an update there. So I kind of wanted to bring that up.
Yeah.
So you joined us a while back to talk about Subgrid and like kind of advocate for it in terms of like, hey, everyone should be excited about this, and let's put some friendly pressure on the browsers to like move this along, right? And then you were with us for our winter special where we were able to raise $10,000 to remove trash from the oceans. That was awesome. You came on. It was another fantastic appearance. I really appreciate you joining us for that. And now we've got you back. So, yeah, I mean, first off, I guess we should probably introduce you to the folks out there who don't know who Kevin Powell is. So, want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. First, just thanks for having me again. It's always fun. And yeah, so if you don't know me, basically I like CSS a lot, and I try my best to get other people to also enjoy it and see that it's not so bad after all, because it sometimes gets a bit of a bad rap or people get frustrated by it. So I try, and that's a lot of what we're going to be doing today is trying to make things as simple as possible and understand a little bit of how CSS does its thing.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's kind of funny because in our last episode, and thank you for the follow, in our last episode, we had our friend Nate Moore on to talk about design tokens and the design tokens working group. And if you look at the members of it, Kevin Powell's in the design tokens working group. And we go, oh, I didn't even know. It's a different Kevin Powell. And that's kind of like, you don't have the most unique name in the world, sure. But for two Kevin Powells to be pretty close like that, it's just kind of funny. But yeah, so as Adrian points out, this is not design tokens Kevin Powell. So if everyone's here like with their design tokens like number one finger and has their shirt on, I'm sorry, you're at the wrong stream. This is the different Kevin Powell.
Yeah, I think Adam Argyle DM'd me at one point being like, oh, I just saw you're on the working on that. That's really awesome. Like, I am. I went and looked it up, and I'm like, my name's there, and it took a bit of digging, and I'm like, oh, there's the other. And I've seen him do some conference talks and stuff before too. So
got it. Yeah, it's just really funny.
Yeah,
yeah. It's Kevin's Powell is what Kevin said in the chat. That's how you say it exactly. But yeah, Kevin, it's awesome to have you back on. And I think you touched on it a little bit, but we're going to be getting into what you're calling responsive CSS the easy way. So you want to give us like kind of the overview of what we're going to be touching on today?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that is a struggle for a lot of people, whether they're coming from sort of the other computer science background and are getting frustrated with CSS, or if you're just new, like doing the whole HTML, then CSS, then JavaScript thing, like CSS at the beginning seems not so bad, color blue and background red. And then you get to layouts and it's like, okay, it's a little bit more work, and then you change the screen size and your layout just breaks and you get very angry. Yeah. And it can seem like a real struggle. And so the main thing I want to go through is sort of the simplest way to approach responsive layouts, and look at it in understanding it in a way and sort of understanding how CSS works and leveraging how CSS works instead of trying to fight against it, which, it's easy to sort of over-engineer we run into situations and you're just throwing as much at it as you can. And usually it's the other approach that works the best. So yeah, that's the sort of the general idea. And with that, so we have on the side, that side, the steps we'll be going through.
I always point the wrong direction first. Like if it was a coin toss, sometimes I would get it right, but it's every single time it's nope, that's the other one. But yeah, pointing at things around your chat, it's the hardest thing in showbiz for sure. But no, what you're talking about there, I've felt the pain so often where you get into like a media query just mess where like you just like, and I remember early on in web development, I would you know, like go like, all right, where does it need to change? Oh, it needs to change at 736 pixels. I'm gonna make a media query for that, and I go in and then you know, 10 pages, you know, 30 components later or whatever, it's just like, oh, this is just it's just
Yeah.
chaos. It's just pure chaos. And if I need to change anything, if they're like, oh, actually the layout's now got 2 sidebars, you're like, well, I quit. This is my 2 weeks notice. I'm out, right? Like so, I'm excited to use the systems better because I think that you can make responsive designs that are going to cause you headaches over time. So I'm excited to get into this. So
Yeah. And the one thing I will say is like I don't want to get into any. Oh, we'll see some use cases obviously because we're going to be building a page. But I try and when I talk about this, I try and do it as like general concept as possible, just so we can take these ideas and you can use it in whatever you're working on, rather than it just being like, here's how you do this specific layout, and then you're trying to do something a bit different, and you're just like, well, that's not what we just learned, so I don't know how to do that. So it's more a lot of the ideas here will be sort of general concept, looking at applying them to our situation that we'll have.
cool.
So we won't cover all the bases, obviously, but
I think I
hopefully,
think that's better, honestly, because Andre in chat just said these foundational topics really are a great thing to cover. Like yeah, like learning the fundamentals lets you use them in new and novel ways. Where if you do learn this is how you do a 3-column layout, you don't know what to do with the 2-column layout or a what, right? Like it's just like all right, well I've got this one trick, but I
yeah,
don't know how to bring it outside of that. So cool. All right, so shall we get started?
yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Where do we want to start? So you sent me
Yes.
a nice little repository. I cloned this down. I love the name first off. So I mean, it's you know, I'm honored, and yeah, I've got that here. So do we want to start here? Do you want to talk through what this repository
So
does for
yeah,
us?
it's sort of a very simple site that we're sort of has multiple stages. We have our main one, then a second and third example that will build off of one another, just so we can sort of see things progressing as we go through a little bit and add in extra details or extra problems that you might run into and how we can solve them.
Cool.
But we'll just be working off of one simple CSS file. So I don't know if Steph is here or not, but we're just running a simple npm script that I sort of grabbed from her, but I modified it, so it's her SAS one. It's on her think do. I didn't grab the link. I should have put it in the chat.
Yeah,
I'll put
someone
it in the
can
chat really
grab.
fast. Actually,
Yeah,
I
can
have it right
grab
here.
stuff. Cool, perfect. And hey, Mark
Um,
Boots, good to see you.
so she created this npm script for compiling SAS and having browser sync running,
Cool.
basically. But we're not writing SAS today. We'll stick with vanilla CSS.
Sounds
So I
good.
modified it so it does what we need it to do, basically.
Cool.
But yeah, if anyone's looking at a very simple just npm script runner for simple things that you're doing, and you don't want to overcomplicate yourself with build tools, running npm scripts, it's a nice simple approach to doing stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, npm scripts can take care of a lot of just a lot of funky things. Like either you're running concurrently or just there's a ton of use cases for it where you might have pulled in like a grunt or a gulp or something before, and now
Mm-hmm.
npm scripts it's just kind of built in there. It's really handy. So
Yeah. So yeah, we could get it up and running just with an npm start, and we'll see that we don't have a very nice page to begin with. But there's one really important thing with the page. There we go.
there we go.
So yeah, it doesn't look like much. I haven't done much styling on it at all. Just so we have something there that's not zero. But one thing that and actually just as we go through, just so you know, I did pull in open props just so we can speed certain things up I know you're comfortable with it. So
Yeah,
we might lean on it a little bit.
sounds good.
So all I've done right now is added some colors basically, and not too much else. But the most important thing to understand at this point is it's basically, or even on link, if you go back to the HTML file and just on link, like comment out both links to the CSS. So we don't have open props and we don't have our own CSS. And if we go back to the page, it doesn't look pretty, but it's responsive, right?
True. That is a good point. Yeah. Like
and
it's by default websites are responsive.
yeah. And I think that's a really important thing to understand right from the beginning. And it sort of it sucks because when there's a problem, we like to blame someone else, but it means we made it not responsive.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's like the very first thing we need to understand is like HTML on its own, before you write a line of CSS, is you have a responsive website.
Got it.
And then it's through our own doing that we run into problems. And understanding, I think that is the fundamentals, but then understanding, why does it even work? And this is one of those things I think that gets often overlooked, or you sort of learn these really basics at the very beginning, but then you don't really think about the implications they have. And that's with how width and height auto work on stuff. So we could link back our CSS files so we can actually do a little bit of stuff. And if we go to the CSS file, so yeah, you can see I haven't really done much. We reset the box sizing because that can get annoying. I took all the margins and padding off, and for fonts, just so it gives us a starting point. And then I switched some font sizes and colors, and that's all we've done so far. And I think it's called, actually, I'm going to forget the class name. It's .intro. If we choose the class .intro, it's going to be like the first little part of our site.
Cool.
And you can give that a background color for now.
Let me turn off Copilot. I've got a different Copilot today. You said background?
Yeah, just give it a background color, whatever you want. You can.
Is it like red 5 for?
That should.
There we go. It's not pretty, but it works.
It's not pretty at all, but it works. And so there's actually, and another one you could do, if you go back in, it's not going to look nice, but just to understand, if you give, say, all the headings a background color too, I have that selector up higher.
Cool.
Yeah, you just give those a background color as well.
Let's go blue. There we go. Cool.
So the two things that are happening, we can see, like, well, whatever, we'll look at the headings for now and then we'll focus on that other part, but they're block level elements. They have the width auto on them, which means they stretch the full size. And they have a height of auto on them, which means that they try to be 0, but things grow as we add content to them. And so it's kind of weird that the width and height auto, by default, they're doing opposites of each other. Width auto wants to take up as much room as it can. Height auto wants to be as small as possible. But from a responsive point of view, those are both perfect behaviors, because everything, it's all based on area, right? The space something needs. So as it gets narrower, it needs to be able to get taller, or if it gets wider, it's going to shrink in height, because it always will take up the same amount of area. Sorry for the banging in the background.
Oh, good.
My little
Kevin has a new puppy, and it's an adorable puppy. So we are, I mean, maybe if chat's good, at the end, we'll get to see the puppy. I don't know. We'll see. If chat behaves itself, maybe we can do it.
Yeah. So actually, the first thing we'll do before we sort of get more into the layouts and just really understanding the whole implications of width auto, because I think a lot of people don't even understand or don't grasp how wonderful it actually is. If you go back to the CSS and we add a margin left to all of them.
That
H1, H2, H3. If you add a margin left on those, I'd say, I don't know, a big enough value that it's noticeable. So maybe 200-300 pixels, 500. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, cool.
And then so there, they've all moved over. But let's say we choose our H2 and we switch the width to be a width 100% instead of a width auto. And we're actually going to
default width is auto. Okay, so now we're assigning one.
We always think that they're pretty much the same thing, but as soon as we do that, we should actually get some horizontal scrolling now, I think, unless my box size.
Yep.
There we go.
Bottom, okay. Yeah. So unfortunately, the way my thing is set up, it cuts off the bottom 100 pixels or so. So
right.
I will have to let you know. Got it.
We're not going to do a lot, but yeah. So it's this thing where width auto is really like, do whatever you want, and the content will just figure the rest out and fit into that space. And so one mistake I often see, and I think people that did float-based layouts are more familiar with this, because it used to be you were setting your margins and then a width and a percentage, and then you had your padding, and you were doing all the math to try and figure out things to get a 4-column layout or whatever it was. It was always a nightmare. But now that we have Flexbox and Grid and stuff, and we do less of that, we don't always understand that with the percentage-based width, it can actually get in the way or have this unintended consequence. So that's why, just relying on the width auto is a very nice thing, unless you have you might have a reason that you want to reset it, but just to say that sticking with the default goes a long way. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that's good to know. So just to make sure that I'm understanding this, the reason why we have that scroll is because we're doing the 5 rems of margin plus this being 100%. It wants to take up 100% of the parent container, which is my window size. So we basically have 5 rems plus the width of my window.
yeah, exactly,
Cool. Okay.
exactly.
Nice. So like not nice, right? But yeah,
Right.
like
Yeah.
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 Cool.
So yeah, we can get rid of those the blue backgrounds and the width and the
All
margins
right.
on that now.
Cool. Width. All right. Should I keep the intro one?
Yeah, we'll keep that one on there. And now, actually, if you just jump back to the page, just because it's easier to see what's happening when we have more space. So if you resize your browser now, just so we can see, and there's that whole idea of like the width and height sort of have a relationship with one another. As we have
Yeah.
less content, it's going to grow, and as we have more content, it shrinks down because it's just the width times the height. It needs a set area to live in, and so if we make one smaller, the other has to get bigger to keep the total area the same. And this is where height auto is the most wonderful thing ever because it just works and
Got it.
it's super easy and it does nice things. And setting when we actually set heights, and I think heights are one of the things that people often feel like they need to set depending on the layout, and sometimes you do need a height on something.
Yeah.
But the idea, actually, I mean, the idea just looking at this with the auto behavior is we're sort of talking about the intrinsic sizing of things, which just means the browser's figuring it out, sort of the simple way of thinking about it.
Okay.
And the more we can rely on the browser figuring out the size of stuff, the better it is for us because it's going to work then. Whereas as soon as we try sort of setting limitations on something, that's where those problems we run into, and then you need a media query to sort of adapt something or change something or whatever it is. So, I mean, one of the early things that I always get people doing that are trying, because I do think some people, you're working on a desktop computer, we're worrying about the design, and you get it working perfectly at your screen size, and then all of a sudden you resize things and things break a little bit. So the first piece of advice really is if you can avoid width, don't set width, and if you can avoid a height, don't set a height, and that
Okay.
sort of solves a lot of your problems. Not realistic necessarily, but for a lot of, for as much as you can, relying on things is a really good start. Then there's two sort of options. We'll go to the height first because people like setting sort of that big hero area that has lots of space around it and the content in the middle. So my first suggestion there is still don't set a height, but just set some padding top and bottom.
Okay.
And just setting a healthy amount of padding top and bottom to it.
Got it. So is that in the intro?
Yeah,
Is the intro
exactly.
hero? Cool. So what are you thinking?
Go wild. I'll let you choose.
So now
Just something, a decent amount, but
okay, cool. So I was gonna go for like 40 view or maybe like 30 view height.
mm-hmm.
And do we want 0 on the
Left and
sides, or
right.
do
Yeah.
we want something there?
Yeah, do 0 because I have a container set up, so you can stick with 0 there. Yeah.
Got it. Cool. All right. Let's see. All right.
So then, yeah, we get this nice amount of space on the top and the bottom. Use viewport height there. So the cool thing with that is if they're on a smaller device, it's going to adapt and it's going to shrink down on its own. So that's kind of handy and really can be super useful.
Cool.
There are issues with viewport height, especially if people are doing like the height 100 VH. And interestingly, we mentioned it and then didn't talk about it. The Safari's technical preview. Yeah.
Yeah. Do we want to mention that real quick? Or
yeah, I'll start there just so because we'll forget if not.
Yeah.
Safari's technical preview, the newest one, just shipped today or yesterday, and includes support for container queries and subgrid. So that's really exciting. And Safari is quickly all of a sudden shipping a whole bunch of stuff because in the 15.4 that launched last week, I think, which is not the technical preview, like the full-on Safari now, they actually support new Viewport units. And I haven't played with them at all yet, so I don't want to say the wrong thing with them.
Okay.
But I know they're dynamic viewport height, small viewport height, and large viewport height. So it's DVH, LVH, and SVH.
Huh.
And they take into account the UI on our devices. So that was always the problem
with like
Right.
iPhones where the bar comes up all of a sudden and all. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
So the small, if I understand correctly, and I've just sort of glanced at the spec and I haven't played with it, so don't quote me on any of this, but I think the small viewport height always assumes that they're on. So it's assuming the keyboard is there and everything else.
Oh.
The large viewport height is assuming they're not. And then the dynamic one will actually adapt to the situation. So if the bar is there or not there, it sort of adjusts as things happen. I think that's how it's supposed to work.
That sounds really
Um,
handy. Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
So viewport height will eventually be something, once browser support for that comes back in, we can actually do that 100 VH and not have issues on phones,
Awesome.
which, yeah, that'd be nice.
We've got Killian Valkoff in the chat saying that's 100% correct, Kevin. And between the two of you, I feel pretty safe saying that's what it is.
Yeah.
It would be 100 DVH
Right.
though.
Yeah.
But
That's
cool.
the one that would sort of, we'd want to be using, but super exciting that we'll have that option.
Awesome.
And that,
Yeah.
So yeah, and I know Safari sort of got this label of the new Internet Explorer that I don't think, especially now, is deserved. They were sort of doing stuff, but they were a little bit different, so I get it. But they just shipped so much stuff lately, and now they're the first one that supports HAS. They're the first one who's supporting those new viewport height things and viewport width units. They're coming in with subgrid. They're coming in with container queries. Like the last, that 15.4 update on CSS level anyway was just like, holy moly, okay, things are getting serious now, and it's nice to see sort of all the browsers pushing each other a little bit, I think.
Who signed on there that is like I'm thinking of just, you know, a influential big person in CSS who went to Apple.
It was Jen Simmons.
I couldn't say if it was Looper or Simmons. I knew it was a Jen. I had that. Couldn't. Yeah. Yes, Jen Simmons. So yeah, like once that happened, it seemed like, okay, things might start looking up, and it seems like already they are. So that's just fantastic. Cool. Yeah, when they hired Jen Simmons. Yeah, so like, yeah, you know, it's not like one person can completely change an entire thing, but I think you know, a lot of people had faith that would be a good turning point, and it seems to be holding to that. So awesome. So
yeah,
what do we want to hit?
So
next?
we'll get back onto it. So one thing,
news,
we'll sort of circle back to using VH there, but I like that we went with that route, because right away you're sort of thinking we're thinking the right way.
Cool.
Another thing just on there that we could do is also, if you do, instead of using padding, if you really need to set, like, it has to be that big, and this is that situation that we just said will eventually be improved with these new units.
Right.
But it's when you can come in with a min height and actually set an actual height on something.
Got it. Now, why is that better?
So this is sort of going with that behavior and circling back to that idea of the default wants to be 0 and it's going to grow with the content. Min height is saying, well, be this big, but if you need to be bigger, that's fine. I'm going to adapt to it.
Okay.
So we're not fighting against the default. We're just sort of saying, like, I want you, you know, instead of your minimum being 0, your minimum is now this. But once we run out of room, we're still going to allow things to work.
Got it. So we obviously lose the centering there with the other thing, but at least we still have that. And then I don't think I'll be able to make this bigger. I probably can with this. But this will grow as I really just abuse it by smushing it.
There we go. Yeah.
Cool.
And then we don't run into overflow issues and all of that.
Right.
So, so it's all that idea of let's again, we're hinting at what our ideal situation would be, but we're not fighting against the default, which wants to grow if it needs to grow and if it runs out of room. So we're still allowing that to happen.
Cool.
And that's, as we said, we were talking about width and height. The defaults are sort of opposite of one another. So with width, it's also the opposite. If you do need to set a width on something, instead of setting a minimum width, you're generally setting a maximum width.
Okay.
Because width, we want it to be able just to shrink away and disappear and get as small as possible. But, you know, looking at this, if you close the dev tools and your text is going all the way across the side, it just, you know, is not very readable and doesn't look very nice.
You have to like do a tennis match kind of thing.
Yeah. So usually we don't mind if things shrink, but we do want to prevent them from getting too big. So we're just saying, you know, it wants to be as big as possible, but it will shrink. It will adapt as it gets smaller. So we just want to lean into that. So we can go back to the CSS, and I have a container already set up. So we can just do a dot container Oh, you have to
Cool.
make the selector, sorry.
Should I leave these alone
Yeah,
or
leave
what should
that
I do with
there. No
these?
problem.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Then what do we want here?
And then,
Max width?
so yeah, we'll come in with a max width, and you can set whatever, I don't know, we'll do 60 rem just because it goes a bit with the notes I took.
Cool.
Now with that, it's going to be stuck to the side. So usually you want to do the margin auto left and right to center it.
Do you do margin auto or do you do like margin auto and zero? Like
Zero. Usually it's zero auto.
Thank
so it's
you.
zero
Yeah.
top and bottom, auto left and right. And I actually did a video today telling people not to do that, but we'll leave that now because it's the most common, and we can talk about that a bit too.
I knew that, Kevin, and I was setting you up. No, I did not know that. That's cool.
But there, at least it centers it, and that works perfectly.
Cool. So
and
all of these have that container on them, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
So, and then if we do have a smaller amount of space, that's completely fine because it's saying that's as big as you're allowed to be. But if we run out of room this way, it'll shrink down. And then we don't have a height set, so it's still allowed to grow. Or in the case of the other one, it's a minimum height, so it's still allowed to grow if we run into that situation.
Cool.
Now, there's two ways we could improve that container a little bit. They're not necessarily a better way to write CSS, but it can open up, we can talk about modern CSS techniques and stuff too. Cool. So the first one is, instead of using margin zero auto, I like using margin inline and only using auto.
Mark Boots just said that. I think he's got same ideas. Margin inline. So what is margin inline? Because people are usually, thinking of margin left, margin right, margin top, margin bottom. What's margin inline?
So margin inline, it's still a shorthand, and it's but it's part of we added, it's been a little while now. We've had these logical properties in CSS, and the idea with logical properties is they're not locked into top, bottom, left, right. They're relative to the writing direction. So if you have a site that's left to right, the margin left is on the left. But if you switch the writing mode and switch like your text direction, everything switches to the other side. If you said margin left, that margin's still on the left, even though really you want everything to mirror with it.
Right.
So margin inline is your inline axis. So we're actually starting a margin inline start and a margin inline end of auto.
Got it.
Which means it effectively is the same thing as, yeah, there you go. So just by doing it with margin inline, it's the shorthand for both of them. On something like a container, you probably would never run into an issue with a zero auto because all you want it to do is center your content and it's sort of utility class. But the more CSS we write, the more I find that using shorthands comes back to bite you sometimes, where you end up with, say, 3 different utility classes on something, and you might have like an MX auto to center, and then you're using like another margin one to like add a margin bottom or something.
Got it. And they start to step on each other's.
Yeah, they start stepping on each other, and one of them overwrites the other one because they maybe only one of them is using a shorthand, but that shorthand overwrites what's happening on the other thing, even though you didn't want that one. Like you didn't want the margin auto left right to touch the top and the bottom. You put a 0 there just because you sort of wanted to omit that. Like, don't worry about that. Just do the left and right.
Right.
Yeah. Now, if we want to get really fancy with it, we can keep the max width of 60 there. Or actually switch it. Sorry, take off the max width and just leave it as a width.
The max part. We're getting rid of max. Got it. Sorry to all the maxes out there. Gotta go.
You're already here. Yeah. Now, obviously, that breaks it because now if we go smaller than that, it's just going to cause some overflow.
Is it? Got it. Okay. I was like, it looks the same, but because we're holding it to that, and it doesn't care about anything else. It's just it's going to hold.
Yeah, but we can, instead of doing a width of 60, and this is sort of what is it? It's like we're going to make it look pretty, but it's not more functional than what we had before. Okay. I like showing people this stuff, if depending on how much CSS they know. But what we can do is use the min function. And then we can give it 2 values. So we could say 100%, comma, 60 rem. And it's going to choose the smaller between the two of them.
Got it. Hence the min.
Exactly. Yeah. So it says choose whichever one of these two is smaller. And so if 100% is smaller than 60, it'll choose the 100%. but if it's bigger, then it will choose the 60.
Cool.
And we can improve that just a little touch more by on the 100%, we can do a -2 rem. Because it's nice, you can do math in these, and the browser just can figure that out, even though it's mixed units and everything, which is always super fun.
So I don't have to wrap this in a calc.
No, it's just like that's
already
perfect.
kind of in a calc, or like a calc is going to take over at some point, in a sense, like just for my mental model. I don't know.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
As soon as you get into like the min, max, and clamp, it just the calc sort of, it lets us do that. And that just means at smaller screen sizes, it's going to keep that little space on the left and the right, so we don't get stuck on the side of the screen like we were before.
Okay, so that's what is giving us, I always struggle to grab like the 3 pixels that allow that, especially on stream. It's like, I got it, just hold on.
It's right there, yeah.
Where is the container here? So if we get rid of that 2 rem, we should see that little gap disappear. Is that
exactly?
Yeah. So now it's just flush against the side, and that's hard to read. So
I see Killian saying that he always mixes up the min and max function, and I do too, because before we had it as a max width, and now we're using a min function, and my brain is so set up to use the max width that I always start off with the max function. I'm like, oh yeah, it's the other one.
Thank you to everyone for saying that. It's not even like, it's definitely a guess and check kind of thing for me, and it's also like, all right, so it's going to take the minimum of 100%. What is the minimum of 100%? What is that? Like try to wrap my head around. Like if it's in JavaScript or something, if it's like 30 rem, it's not, I can figure this one out. Like
exactly.
I know this, but then when it's like you're comparing, I'm like, okay, but once you see it in action, like, yes, this is doing the thing I want it to do, I can move on now. Truthfully, full disclosure, I typically go to like one of Steph's CSS snippets things, and I'm like, yep, I'll see this. That did the thing that I wanted to. We're moving on, and I just get to So I appreciate that. So
and actually, that does. Oh, sorry.
No,
go for it.
No, you go ahead, because mine's a little off topic.
Okay, so I was going to say that is one of the issues with using like a min function like this, when it worked perfectly fine when we just did max width on it. Is it does add this layer of abstraction a little bit, that like if somebody were to come across this, they're sort of staring at it for a second going, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily want to do it now, but just to say this is a really nice use case for custom properties, where you throw in like a couple locally scoped custom properties saying like max width, padding, and whatever. And you just, so that way you're not worrying about like the actual function. You just see like, oh, my maximum width is the max width custom property. I have my padding one, and I have like whatever else you need in there. And then it's easy to do that. Plus then it becomes super customizable. You want to change different container, you throw an inline style on there with overwriting the custom property, and all of a sudden it's a different width.
Yeah.
So
the customization aspect is great, but also just like the max width adds a level of readability to the min function that it doesn't otherwise have. So it's a lot easier to like wrap my head around that. So that's a really good point. Custom properties do so much that like I definitely I wasn't as excited about them as I should have been. It was just like, oh, cool, no more Sass. When I first saw them, but that wasn't the result at all. There's so much more, and Sass is still very much needed and useful and all that stuff. So, thrilled with custom properties. Our friend Splendid Development, aka Aaron, says, should note that when doing sites for right to left content, there's a lot of design that you will want to switch, but due to how ingrained some conventions are, you'll still want parts of UI to stay in the same position or close to. Interesting. That makes sense. So like, I guess like, hamburger menus being at the top right, or like just like certain things of,
right.
If it's text based, you want to flip it. But if it's like sidebars are on the left, you might want to keep that. That's a great point. Aaron, thank you for sharing that. Cool. All right. So what do we want to hit on next?
All right. So I spent all this time just saying that, CSS, everything, you have an HTML file, you have a responsive website. Let's try and go in with, let's take advantage of those defaults and make sure that, we're working with them. So we have a min height or we have a max width, just to sort of lean into what the browser's already doing.
Yeah.
There is one small exception to that. And if you go back to the site, and click onto our second example link at the top left. Images break all of that. And now I've gone overboard. These are very, very, very big images. But just
But
to
I
say that,
appreciate these
yeah.
images very much. We here support these images. If we can make them bigger, we would. So yeah, this is
So obviously, one thing I'm not talking about right now is image optimization, which is a bit of a different story.
yeah.
So please don't use this to bring in your gigantic image and just make it work.
Yeah.
Not the right way to do it.
Just
These are
bring it down
probably,
to this. Yeah.
yeah, these are very large ones. But you know, there is the one very simple fix. So if we go back to the CSS, I'm sure a lot of people, this is part of a reset, so maybe they don't even think about it, but it's just IMG and then max width 100%.
Wow, the fingers are like cold and just
Yeah.
all over the place right now.
I know the feeling, and that fixes that problem.
Yeah.
It's important to know with the max width, the images won't get bigger. We're not setting an actual width on it. We're saying like, if it's larger than its parent, shrink down. But if you had this little small image, you don't want it to necessarily get really big. Like if all of a sudden you brought in some icons and then, you know, they just explode and get super huge because you set a width 100%, it would probably be bad. And just if you had small images, the quality would look terrible as well if they have to get bigger.
Good point. And these have a height of auto right now, right?
Yeah. Actually, and I wasn't planning on talking about it. That just made me think that I've had a lot of questions lately, because if you run a Lighthouse thing on a site, it's gonna, I think one of the things that comes up for improvement is setting a width and height attribute on all of your images.
Yeah.
And then people are like, well, then it's not responsive because I'm setting a width and a height. The reason that they're asking you to do that is all the browsers now on images, if it has, and it's the same for iframes and other things, is if they have a width and height attribute, they use that to know the aspect ratio of the image. So if you're on a slow device, it knows that even if you're using CSS and it's changing the size of the image, it knows like intrinsically what the aspect ratio is. So it's going to reserve that space as the rest of, you know, as the image loads in. Or if you have an iframe, because I'm sure everybody's been on their phone on a news site and the content just keeps jumping as the layout or as the ads come in.
It's a lot of fun.
It's
great. I love having
it's a little game you have to play.
After the a new ad comes in, and this one's a tall one, so
But and it's one of those things that we're always like testing things on our nice modern devices, but you know, we have to be aware someone might be with a crappy connection on an old 3G device that their image is loading in a little slower. So just not having your images cause content jumps could be a nice thing. So that's why they tell you to do it.
Got it.
Obviously, going in and manually adding in width and height attributes yourself is a bit of a nightmare, but hopefully you're not having to do that. You have some, you know, there's ways of sort of having that as a background process.
Yeah, if you're pulling it from local, your framework can probably have a helper that helps you figure it out. If you're pulling it in from like a CMS, I know Prismic obviously, and I know that we send along the width and the height with the image and the image URL and a few other parameters. So if you're putting a Prismic image in, you can just grab those and add it to your image. Now here's the question. If I add a width and a height in line on that image, how do you keep it responsive? If I just told the browser, hey, this is 500 pixels tall, how do I set my style so that on a phone it becomes the right size for the full width and the full
Yeah. So yeah, you could, even with what we have now, I'm pretty sure it would work. Worst case, you'd have to throw a height auto on there with it, because we have the width 100%. So just declaring, because the CSS will overwrite whatever that, it's not like an inline style, like we're not setting style equals, we're doing like the width attribute and a height attribute.
Right.
So your CSS will always overwrite that. So if ever you find that you do the max width 100% and you have the style or you have the width and height attributes on there and things are squishing, like your image is actually stretching, just throw a height auto and it should solve that problem.
Got it. Yeah, so I think that's the important part you said there, where even if I have an inline height equals and width equals, my CSS is still going to shape that picture and the height and the width will help it keep that aspect ratio, but my CSS is still going to take over and size it differently.
Exactly, yeah.
Cool.
And that's actually why we even have aspect ratio now as a CSS property. It
Really
started
nice.
off by being this underlying thing where the browser would figure out the aspect ratios based on the widths and heights. And then it's built on top of sort of that technology, whatever. I don't know anything about how browsers work, but
they show pictures and text, I think, is what and they're mainly for YouTube, is my understanding. But we do have Killian in the chat, so if you want to throw out any assumptions,
it's true, yeah.
Killian is there to say actually. So yeah, he's incredibly knowledgeable there. So Reanimated X says, so should you always throw in height auto just in case, or is that liable to cause some problems?
I can't think of any problems it would cause off the top of my head. I don't even know if we actually need it or not, because I don't think you even need it, because it should be the default. But if ever you find you're running into an issue, I think that would be the solution.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Good to know. All right, cool. Well, these horses are behaving themselves now. We've got them safely in line. That's good.
So yeah, I think now, we haven't actually made a layout yet. We've sort of just done a little bit we added a background color and added a container and a few other things. So getting into more of the layout and creating layouts.
Okay.
The first thing is, like, we hear mobile first and desktop first on how to approach it and how to approach things. And I still am. I tell people mobile first, even though my messaging, we'll talk about it now. I just sort of have started changing a little bit how I talk about that.
Okay.
I do like the idea of mobile first, but even instead of worrying about like mobile first or desktop first, to me, it's about like, let's set up the sort of general styling. So things that don't impact layout, which we sort of been doing now. I guess our container is layout, but it works everywhere.
Right.
I set up some font sizes for my H1, my H2, my H3. We set a nice color on our intro section.
Yeah,
so doing all of those just like very general things, often layout wise, like our mobile layout is so basic anyway, where just content is all stacking, which is the default behavior. And that's why this idea of mobile first, I like it, because I like that idea that, well, I'm just setting up a bunch of general styling, and then a lot of stuff is already looking good on mobile, and I don't have to worry about layout so much there, because it just sort of functions. And then I can add the complexity later on. We'll see examples, though, where that's not necessarily the case. But I think that's it. So instead of even worrying about like mobile first, desktop first, whatever it is, don't even worry about layout. Try coming in and just worrying about like getting things to look, their colors, your background colors, your spacing, those types of general things first.
Cool. Makes sense.
Then there's two different types of layout in a sense. There's more like micro layout and more large scale layout, I guess you could say. Like you could say like, I need a sidebar, I need my content, my header, my footer, like the larger scale things. But then we have like the simpler ones where I'll talk about at large screens anyway, but potentially small ones. Your navigation, you just need they need to go next to each other instead of on top of each other. Or in this case, I've also set up a whole bunch of tags for these sort of bloggy post things I've done. They're just on styled lists at the moment.
Yeah.
But we'll start there. And it's just I think it's I don't remember what I called it now, actually. We'll have to go to the index. So it's tags plural, and then we have the individual tag themselves. Cool. So we can turn off the list styling on there. And then there we go. Cool. And then we can let's select the individual tag themselves.
Okay.
Just so it'll highlight a little bit better what we're doing. Maybe give them a background color or a border or something to make them look like a little, can be like a light color, or we could do a darker color. And
let's go all the way. And then gotta go Dodger Blue. That's
perfect. They
sponsor us, so that's the thing.
It must be nice having the Dodgers as a sponsor. You need to get in on that money.
It makes a lot of sense though, why they would, right? Like so.
So right now we have that issue. They're full width and all of that, but on the tags itself now we can throw in a display flex on there.
Sorry.
On the
got it. because these are plural. You know what I mean?
I know. Yes.
There are
Sorry.
multiple. No,
Yeah.
it's totally fine.
I should
I'm
have called
just
it.
trying to defend the fact that I'm a smart person and I didn't make a mistake.
I should have called it tag list instead of tags.
All good. All good.
Uh,
I'd do the same thing. Cool.
and then so they all go next to each other, and then we can use. I guess it's not as modern as it used to be, but we can throw a gap on our flex now, which is amazing.
Gap is no, it is so good. Like I don't think people fully appreciate. Like that was a big reason to pull in CSS Grid when I didn't really need 2 dimensions before, just because like having to do the margin left but not last child or whatever. Like, I'm so glad I don't have to do that anymore. Gap is a really simple but just a huge improvement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So whatever you want, I'll let you choose. And yeah, and we're even going to see the gap, so it spaces everything out, which is nice. But even from, I mean, actually, there's Flexbox was like this wonderful thing that actually makes responsive design so much easier because it just, things squish down, they become flexible. It's a little bit of a mystery box in a way that how it works, I think, for a lot of people. I've dug really deep into it, and it's still like a little bit, when you're really like getting into the weeds of it, you're like, there's a little bit of magic that goes in, but it's nice on these types of things. Because the big difference before that we had was when we had just the auto or display block going on, they had the auto width was the full size.
Right.
As soon as we do a display flex, they go next to each other, but they also shrink down to be as small as they can possibly get. If you're doing columns of content, it's a little different because you have long paragraphs and stuff. So that's when like there's wrapping text, and this idea sort of it's still based on them wanting to be small, but for these types of elements, it's so nice because they just take up the room that they need to take up, and that's it. So it's super wonderful for that. The one thing that's funny with Flexbox is while it lets things squish, it's not very responsive in that if we make the screen smaller now, they overflow because they want to go next to each other, but we get you just get that awkwardness happening until it has enough room.
Yeah, and the VS Code one is actually breaking lines to try to squish more, right? Like it's doing its best, but
it tries really hard. Tries really hard. And Flexbox really is based on like I don't know. It's based on the intrinsic sizing of things. So it wants to set things to the max width property, and it uses max width to like calculate how everything is going to be sized. And the max width is all of the text on one line, but like, so if you had like their VS Code, it's 2 words, but it's shrinking down to those, sticking them onto one line.
Right.
But because we have a flex shrink in place, it goes, okay, I want to be that big, but I can't be, so I will wrap that text just because we're getting squished down.
Right.
But we can make it more responsive just by adding in a flex wrap on there.
Cool. And Mike, thank you for the 12 months, buddy. What a year. We have to celebrate our friend anniversary at some point. This has been it's been fantastic. Thanks for the follow, man. Flex wrap. This one's always been it's a weird one for me because I want to put true. You know what I mean? Like it's like flex wrap. Yes.
Yeah.
Just
yes, exactly. And even the flex wrap, no wrap that's not hyphenated is.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a nitpick, but just in my brain, I'm like flex wrap. Sure. Yeah.
Yep. So now if we shrink it down, they should wrap underneath. And this is also where gap is just the best. Because that was one of those things you were talking about before when you were doing that, like not, margin left, not on first child. But then when you had wrapping content, it didn't work. And you just got mad. Whereas now with gap, it just works. And it's super, super cool.
It's because if I had a margin left on this item, it would be not flush with the first one, right? It's just like, it was a little thing, but it I don't know. It never seemed like it should have been that complicated, but I understand why. I'm just thankful is all I am. Yes. I'm just thankful. I'm not bitter, just thankful.
Yeah. And it really, for me, having gap on there because of this sort of the 2-dimensional gap that we can have where it just works is enabled this type of thing to be so easy to do. And it opens up some doors that I think weren't really possible before, which is super handy. And this is the type of thing, like here we're using it for this list, obviously. and it works, and you could have a ton of them and it's going to work because they're going to wrap if you don't have a lot. But this is sort of like that micro layout type thing where I'm talking about, where you're dealing with like, I want them to go next to each other, but I don't care if we have 3 of them or 5 of them, or if they wrap, we just need it to fit. And so we're just throwing a few, like not much. We have to modify a few of the defaults, but it just sort of does its thing, and we're happy with it.
Right. And with like a micro layout, you don't have to worry about like lots of children, so to speak, right? It's just like, it's just got this, it's going to contain maybe a list, but you don't have to worry about like, well, what if that has a thing inside it and a thing inside it and a thing inside it, where macro layouts, it's like, you gotta consider a lot more options.
Mike says that if you don't add a padding to those, that he's going to have a stroke.
Yeah, it's just not gonna. I don't think we have time, honestly. It's yeah, we're super tight on time. So if we could just get to anything else,
yeah, okay.
I feel you, Mike. I feel you. It's definitely like my first thing with like badges or whatever. It's like, all right, let's add some padding there, and let's put maybe a border radius on it, just smooth that out. Yeah, it's just think of it as highlighted text, right? Let's just do one of these. There it is. Oh, it is, buddy. Oh my God! Wait, time out. That's the same color.
It might be.
Is the Windows default for highlighting text Dodger Blue, and is that why I love Dodger Blue? Or is that this page? I need to hold on. GitHub, what's your... It's Dodger Blue. That's... Okay. Oh, no, that's just making it darker, but that's the same color. Chat, we just I feel like I'm Nicolas Cage, and I just unfurled the documentation of independence. I don't know what it's called. I'm blanking. I'm live. I'm talking live. I'm not gonna remember a document, but this is, I don't know. That's my biggest takeaway so far, Kevin. So top of that. Top of that. All right, I'm back. I'm sorry. All right. So
okay,
what do we want to hit next?
So one way, just to say right now, we've set that up as our tags have the display flex, the gap, and the flex wrap on it. That for me is a really nice use case for a utility class where you can just use it anywhere you want it. So like for, you throw it on then your navigation, you throw it on your list of badges, you have your tags, you have whatever else that you sort of come and run into. And another use case there for gap, you can set that as a custom property, and then just, on my navigation, I need the gap to be bigger, or over here, I need it to be smaller. Nice. So yeah, we don't need to do that now, but just that idea, I think, is a good one for, don't do the same 4 lines of CSS over and over again. With
tiny little, 1 rem and then 1.25. Yeah, exactly. That makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Really good advice.
Or actually, you know what? Let's do that, because it falls into my next one of the things we're going to work toward. Because we're going to use that. So maybe just turn tags into do the gap first.
So I have a default here, and then So is that I've wondered this, and I'm curious your take. So would you have this set up where you put it here, and then in a like nav tags. Oh, that's GATs. Nav tags, you go gap is 2 rem, right? So I guess it would be, would you do tags? Oh, I hit a thing. 1 sec. Would you do tags and then nav or something like that, where you just reset this, but then so my question is, do you do this setup, or do you do something like this? Mm-hmm. And then if this is set here, it becomes that, but otherwise it has this fallback. What's your preference there?
I've been doing it this way more often.
Okay.
Yeah. I used to do it more the other way around, and I don't know why I switched, but I just find it a little bit, here's my property, and then I have sort of my other things that are manipulating it.
Cool.
A little bit. The one issue I have run into it that I've always sort of gone back, should it be an inline style, or should it be a data attribute, or should it be something different?
Okay.
Just because it's say you have a utility, you have your utility class that's setting everything up, and then you just have your random .nav has a gap on it. But then if somebody's just coming up across that, like obviously you can sort of make the connection that there must be something that it's using, but it's so weird when you see like a property like because your nav might have other stuff on it too, and then you just have this random gap there, and you're just like,
Right.
wait.
And then you have to do the Nicolas Cage in
Yeah, you're trying to like
National
make that
Treasure.
connection. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of figuring stuff out. So yeah.
But that's the fun of CSS, right? Is trying to find the right way to think about it and having no one agree.
It's the fighting that we love. Absolutely. Love this. Oh my gosh. So sorry. That Adrian guy, it's his name. I'm not just, says, my friend just got a dev job at MLB. I clipped this. I'm going to ask if the conspiracies are true. Get to the bottom of it for me. I need to know. Cool. So yeah, do we want to, so what were we doing? I made this as part of a question, but
yeah. So we can delete the tags
Cool.
nav from there, and maybe just change tags to like flex list or something, because we have like it is for lists as well, and even that could be, anyway, we could have like an unstyled list plus a flex row or a flex wrap, whatever it is. Let's leave it like this to keep it simple. So in the index, we can add that to the tags.
Just
because
would you do that, or would you replace?
The tags isn't really serving a purpose, so that comes down to whatever you want. I think it's fine to replace it.
Cool.
Yeah, and we could also add that to our. Oh yeah, we have a whole bunch. I forgot about that. Sorry.
Okay.
There you go. Oh. And then the advantage with that is, I didn't set up the nav. Oh, I did set. Okay, the nav list. We can switch that over then. Perfect. I was like, wait, did I do that as a list? I don't remember. Perfect. So we can use it on our navigation, and then it happens to work. Something's not working. Everything's been saved.
Flex list. Flex list. But it's getting the blue still. Maybe our little trick for the gap? No, but that wouldn't break it, would it? That's tags.
Oh, it's still showing. I know why.
I'm
sorry.
Page.
This is my fault. Page. Yes. Yeah.
No, it's all good. I'm changing stuff on the wrong spot. Why is it still blue? Oh, because the tag. Right. The tag had the blue. That's where I was really confused. Of like, it's getting some of our styles, but nice. All right, cool.
And then on the navigation too, we probably have to switch it. And that is sort of go into what my next thing that I want to talk about with this idea. So now they're all going next to each other. So this is where we could, modify that. Again, I've seen use cases where it's an inline style to modify it. I've seen it with data attributes. So you sort of have like a data gap or something. I've seen it with there's a lot of different ways we can sort of approach it. I think an inline style is fine, just because then people can sort of modify it there and it's close, whatever.
So that would be like style equals, and then we would set the hyphen gap.
Yeah, you could do gap like 2rem or something. There we go.
A little bit bigger. Cool.
And then one thing, we're sort of going to move in now into like this idea of we were following what I had outlined, but I haven't been sort of outlining the steps that we're going through.
Okay.
But this is still part of that like idea of the path of least resistance, where we're just trying to do things that are going to work, that aren't going to cause us problems, no matter the screen size and stuff like that. It's just flowing, everything's okay. And then I always get questions when it comes to then like media queries and like building in this complexity and everything. But my first thing before media queries is always like, do you really need a media query? Like, why do you need to change what it's like? And I know as devs, you get a design and you have to do what the designer put there. And that's obviously, a different story. But I have seen a very large influx, and I'm really happy to see this actually with navigations, is if you go back to our file, you'll see I've commented out a whole bunch of list items there. And it's really the wonderful thing with this type of thing is it doesn't matter what you really have. If you did this, and I know it doesn't look nice, we don't have our logo and stuff, but you just have a whole bunch of links. We have a wrap on there. So if the page is smaller and someone's on mobile, it's going to work. Right. Our gap's kind of big because it's 2rem now.
But yeah, could be.
You could do 2, yeah. And I will say, very good on you. I always get those the wrong way around.
I had to, like 5 minutes ago, I probably didn't hear what you said because I was like, it's top first. And then, okay, yes. So I had to dig a little bit. Yeah.
And I've actually seen this popping up on a lot more sites these days, which I think is, again, normally you don't have like 45 navigation links. You might have 6. So
Right.
like, do you need that complexity of having to build in a hamburger menu for something that like could just do this? There's no JavaScript needed. Everything is there. It works. It's fine. And we're still getting into this idea of like the intrinsic sizing, letting the browser figure things out as much as possible. And just the more we can get the browser figuring stuff out and getting the layout to do whatever it thinks, we hint at it. We say like, okay, make this flex, allow them to wrap, and then you figure it out from there based on whatever you have. And that comes into this idea of like why CSS is so different a little bit from the other ones. And I also didn't save the link, but it's a talk by Miriam Susan called "Why is CSS So Weird?"
Okay.
It's on YouTube. It's just, if anybody has the time to watch it, it's maybe 10 minutes long. It's fantastic. But the TLDR is just that we don't know, like CSS is strange because we don't know what the users has, right? Like we sort of have to give clues to what they should be getting, but we don't know the size of their device. We don't know the aspect ratio. We don't know the pixel ratio or density. We don't know the accessibility features they might have on. Are they using a screen reader? Are they in a high contrast mode? We don't know those things. And so we're trying to, our best to be like, this is the ideal situation. But there's so many different ways that reaches the end user and they can be consuming it. And it's that unknown, I think, that makes it really hard for people, because especially if you're coming from other languages where you say like, do this and it does that. And then you get to CSS where it's more about like, well, we need to live in this, I don't know, we just need it to be there and sort of adapt, and it could be different, and the user could change their settings and it's going to influence the layout, and like, how is all that going to work?
Yeah.
But that's why, as much as possible, hinting at what the ideal is and just letting the browser figure out all of these things takes away a lot of the issues that we can run into, where we're really fighting and trying to get into very strict layouts.
That's a really interesting mindset, because it's never like where you go console log 1+1 and it's like, well, this user has dark mode on, so it's 5. It's like, it's never that kind of like,
exactly.
It's always 2 on every device. Like, you can rely on that, where it sounds like you're almost sending more of an idea to the browser and just like, hey, it's kind of, I want this sort of thing, and you're not like prescribing exact at pixel 330 by 400 I want a black dot, and going on from there. So it's just kind of like saying, this is the shape and idea of what I want, but depending on what this browser's rolling with, paint something in that realm, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the mindset shift to like think that way instead of that more like, I need X, give me X, or whatever it is. It is a really hard thing. And it's also for people that aren't designers, like making some of these decisions and other things too, where you're sort of like, even when it comes to like the max width on a container, because you want to worry about line length or something like that. Like if you're not a designer and you never worried about that before, well, it looks fine, right? And then so there are, and again, you might be getting the design and following a design. So even then you're getting a static Figma file, and then you're getting the small one and the big one and maybe a middle one, and you have to figure out everything that's going to happen in between a lot of the time. And so just, again, that idea of, okay, let's, how is it going to get from A to B is sometimes not obvious. And so just trying to do it as much as possible with like hinting at it rather than prescribing exactly what you need usually means less headaches in the long run.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And Ryan Trimble says he just removed a hamburger menu on a doc site we're building at work, as there were only 2 links in the nav. It's like, yeah, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just added complexity because you always have a hamburger menu. That's sites have to have those. Right?
Yeah.
Cool.
The next thing we can do, just continuing on that, like the Flex is really nice for this, because Flex really works intrinsically in the sense that it sort of just, you do display flex and it works, and the browser figures out a lot of it. But sometimes we want, more layout and stuff. So we'll look at grid as well.
Cool.
On this one. So if we go, I called it intrinsic grid because we're going to make an intrinsic grid, which is just after. There it is. Yeah. So this has all our article previews in it.
Cool.
So we're going to make it's going to be partially intrinsic and then fully intrinsic, I guess. It's an awkward way to say it. But so we'll throw a display grid on there.
Cool.
And then one thing that's less satisfying when we use grid compared to flex is when you do a display flex and hit save, you see stuff happen.
Yep.
Whereas you do display grid, you hit save, and maybe depending if you turned your margins off or not, like the spacing might slightly change and nothing else changes. And you're just like, oh, that was underwhelming.
Still
right?
Stacked. Cool.
Yeah.
Grids. The same.
But let's go into that intrinsic grid. And just to start with, we'll throw a grid template columns. And on there, let's just do one FR 3 times. We'll do it the long way to start with, just in case anyone's not familiar with grid. And that gives us 3 columns. And if you're not familiar with grid, the FR unit is if maybe Killian actually knows better than I would, but I'm pretty sure it's based on the Flexbox algorithm. In how it figures things out a little bit, because it's about space distribution, which is basically what Flex is as well. So we're saying I want 3 columns. We're setting up 3 grid template columns, but the 1FR is the browser is going to figure out how big each column should be based on the available space and everything, and so you just get 3 equal columns.
Right.
So technically, it is an intrinsic layout in the sense that we're not deciding how big those columns are. It's figuring it out. When we get too small, it does cause some overflow and some issues, but the browser's figuring it out. It's saying, I have this much space. We're going to try and do 3 columns. And when we run into long words, I think are what's causing the overflow, because it can't shrink anymore based on, it won't, we're not getting any line breaks in the words and stuff. So like copywriter won't break into two lines.
Got it.
Or any long words. That's
so that one seems to be what's stopping us from shrinking.
Setting,
so because that one word won't shrink anymore, some of the other ones.
Well, that's the one funny thing with the FR is like that one can't shrink anymore, because it's a little bit like our before when like we had those 2 words. What was it? The VS Code was breaking on 2 lines,
right? Because
it was like, oh, like I'll keep shrinking because I can get smaller. Right. So that one's like, I can't get smaller than this, but the other ones are like, oh, we can keep shrinking because we don't have long words in us, basically.
Yeah, so these are no longer equal, where like the idea of 1FR, 1FR, 1FR is that these are equal, but now they're not. That's interesting.
Yeah, and there is a solution to that, and I don't remember what it is, but I think if you use it, you'll get equal columns, but it would introduce overflow. I think that's sort of like the compromise you'd have to run into. But ideally, at small screens, you're not squishing them down that much. So let's fix this a little bit. And we can change it from 1FR, 1FR, 1FR to a repeat syntax. And we could actually keep it the same, just really fast, if you did a 3, 1FR. And that's just a faster way to do it, because you're saying I'm repeating 3 times 1FR, but then if you need 2 columns, you do a 2. You need 4 columns, you put a 4. So it's a little bit faster than typing out FR as many times as you need.
It's easier to change. It's easier to just kind of see what's going on, and it's easier to avoid typos. I think where like FR,
yeah, exactly.
It's nice.
But the repeat syntax really is nice when we bring in the auto. I'm going to say the wrong one. Auto fit is the right one.
Cool.
So instead of an FR, you put auto fit, and then that's another function. So we need parentheses again.
Is it hyphen?
Sorry, no, it's comma. Instead of 3. Sorry, I'm mixing things up. It's auto fit, but instead of 3, we're saying auto hyphen fit, comma. It's not the function. The min max is the function.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I'm not used to talking it. I'm used to just typing it. So when I'm trying to like say
tough.
it out loud,
I hope Chad appreciates that. Where like having to tell someone else how to do this, like.
And then as soon as you're looking at it, you're like, wait, I said something wrong there. Yeah.
So many times in the rehearsal, Kevin just says, just give me your keyboard. I'm like, Kevin, that's not how this I can't. Yeah. Because that's like, so many times, like if I'm ever teaching someone like Photoshop or something, I'm like, so you gotta. Here, just let me. Like
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it. I know how to do it.
I,
Yeah.
I used to teach in the classroom, and we did Photoshop and other stuff like that. And you just be like, okay, now choose that tool there. No, the one down. No, that's too. Just
That
please.
yeah, the hand holding a
Yeah.
sponge and like the weird tack thing, and yeah. Now use the pen tool and like hold. Pen tool is weird. I know how to use it. Like it's a yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
it's
that
tough.
was always fun.
Yeah. Min max.
Or even, I mean, for me, even when I was teaching students and they're not using, like, I'm like, okay, use your move tool now, and they take their mouse and they go and take the tool, and then they come all the way back, and I'm just like, it's V on the keyboard. Next time you're going to use the V shortcut, and then like the next time they're still going with the mouse, and I'm just like, you don't need to know all the shortcuts. There's too many, but for
But
like the
V, you
5 most
gotta
popular,
lock that one in.
yeah,
Yeah. H for the hand. Yeah. There's a few where it's just like you're gonna go
yeah,
back and forth with those. Lock
yeah.
them in. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry for the tangent.
All good. I say we leave the CSS stuff. Let's go down this path for a while now.
Repeat. So yeah. So I actually now, if I was to teach someone CSS from scratch, we're going from zero, I would actually teach Grid before I would teach Flex, because Flex is really cool in that like display Flex, it does something. And even like we saw with those little tiles or the tags or whatever we want to call them, like things like that, that's what you need, and it's going to work and it's perfect.
Right.
But a lot of the time, like, you're not doing these complicated components early on. You're just doing very general layouts and stuff. And I find Grid's actually a lot easier to understand because it's a bit more like you're doing it on the parent. You set columns, the things just fit in those columns. You're not worried about then going in on the children. Do I need to shrink? Do I need to grow? Do I need to set widths to make them the same?
That's interesting.
It's so yeah, and I've been using Grid a lot more. The Flexbox for me is becoming like, for what we just looked at, I need little things that go next to each other, simple things that adapt, and I don't have to worry about it. Whereas Grid's more when you're setting a structure up.
Yeah.
The hard thing with Grid. Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, go for it.
I thought you were gonna say because it's more versatile, where you can use it for a lot of Flexbox issues, but you can't use Flexbox for all of Grid issues, if you know what I mean, right? But but that's an interesting, yeah, that's good insight.
And the thing that's I wish was simpler, but there's no way to simplify this. But just like there's all these properties and values that are nowhere else. So like even the FR unit, it's Grid only. And now we're looking at a repeat syntax, which is Grid only. And then we're throwing an auto fit and a min max in there. And those, like, it's a whole bunch of really new things. So like there is like this little, like a steep learning curve, but then once you like, and you can go really deep into Grid and you can do crazy stuff with it. And like, but this is sort of like,
and now we're getting subgrid.
Yes. That's
right. Like,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So, but I do think it's one of those ones where you do like, let's learn the basics of Grid. Now let's learn the basics of Flex. And then like, that's going to handle 95% of what you need. And then you're going to get more into the weeds from there and you slowly level up. So this is one of those ones where it's like, okay, we'll throw 4 new things you've never seen at you to get this layout to work, but then you're just going to reuse this every time anyway. So it's fine.
Yeah.
So the min-max syntax allows you, it's for anyone who knows clamp, it's sort of like clamp where you're throwing a small size and a big size, but there's no middle value, which is kind of weird because like, how does it know what to grow and what to shrink? But basically, anytime you use a min-max, you're going to set a minimum value, which would be a set value, and then a maximum value, which is usually going to be 1FR because it just means take up as much space as you can. So in this case, and it's always hard to know, like, what do I set as my minimum? Depends on the layout you need, but in this case, I want it to work at all screen sizes. So I just set something pretty small on it. So like a 10 rem or 15 rem should be perfectly fine because we should never get smaller than that.
What does that amount to in pixels? Some 160?
10 rem would be about 160. So even like 10, 15, like you're never, well,
that's super small. There's not, I mean, like an Apple Watch is even a bit bigger than that, right?
So
I don't know the dimensions.
I mean, the one that I'm most is there's a folding device now that has like a 260 or a 280 or something, and I'm just like, oh no, you never really worried beyond a certain point, and now you're just like, oh, now there's a smaller screen size that we have to sort of worry about. And I think typography is the big issue there, just because you get a long word that all of a sudden overflows, and
right, you don't want to have it spelled out like 2 letters at a time going down either. That's not a great experience.
Exactly, yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, if we save that, let's throw a gap on there too, maybe.
Cool.
Just so we can have some. Oh, maybe we made them too small.
Did we? A little bit, maybe.
Let's make them a little. We'll throw a gap on there and maybe make them 15 rem.
Wait,
so this is where the issue of a small number does come in.
And you said 15 rem?
Yeah, let's make it 15. And the idea there is just you want to set like a minimum size for those columns. There, we're back to 3. Just because at one point they could get too squishy. But what's magical about this is if they hit that point and they can't, once they hit 15, they go, oh, I can't be smaller than 15. So now I'm not 2 columns anymore, or I'm not 3 anymore. I'm going to switch to 2 columns, which allows me to fit that space. And then again, it goes down. So that's why we're not actually defining how many columns there are. We're saying it's the auto fit property or value instead. So the auto fit saying fit as many as you can. You create, the browser is going to figure out how many columns there's going to be based on this min max that's here. And so again, we're letting the browser figure things out instead of us having to worry about it and say at this size there's this and at this size there's that and all of that.
Yeah, and there we've got like a responsive layout, and I'm not seeing any media queries here.
Yeah, exactly. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean,
because like the way that you would do this otherwise is like, all right, 760 and below, I'm 2 columns, 480 and below, I'm 1 column. Like just having to declare all of those and figure it out, like handhold that, and yeah, this is just a lot nicer. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And
it definitely takes up a little bit of wiggle room on that min value, like we saw, just to make sure that like you don't end up with 6 super small columns when you're at your normal size.
Yeah.
But once you sort of find a number or value that works well for you, you can get it to be what you need. You sort of, I find with most things, you sort of end up falling back on the same numbers all the time, and they just happen to work well because it falls within the range that looks good most of the time, unless you had some weird font sizes going on or something.
Got it. And Valoa says it's the Galaxy Fold. It's on the Chrome DevTool device list. Oof, that is rough. Let me see. Repeat. So Valoa said repeat autofill min max and then min 100% 17 rem 1 FR. Here, I'll copy this
that's
over.
true. Yeah.
Just interesting. What's the difference here besides the my computer's again, like some RAM spikes. Sorry about that.
That's all right. This is one of those interesting things. So interesting using autofill. That's another one of those. We have autofit and autofill. I tend to always just use autofit. The difference between autofit and autofill is autofill will actually, if you go to the index, leave that one commented, go to the index.
Okay.
Oh no, we're on second example. Sorry, second example. And maybe comment out all of them except for 2 articles.
Okay, so article.
So we're only left with 2. Because it's a hard one to explain, but once you see it in action, it should be easier. Sorry, I'm making you try and count.
All good. Try and count to 2? How dare you, Kevin? Yeah. You know I'm not that smart.
And so if we go and look at the site now, and then we'll switch it just so we see the difference. So if you go bigger, they're just going to keep sort of growing into that space, hopefully. Yeah. Now, if we switch it to an auto fit instead of the autofill, autofill. Cool. Yeah. We have a 3rd column that's coming in, even though there's no content.
Huh.
So it's going, I can fit a 3rd column. So auto fit will look at what content it has, whereas autofill is going to keep making columns based on what you gave it, regardless of the content.
Got it.
So it'll start making empty columns. So you could, if you set something up to be like 6 columns or potentially 6, it could have 4 empty columns in there. Now, if you do it like that, I'm not sure, because that's one of those ones that my mind always breaks on.
Yeah. Doesn't seem to change a lot. It's just interesting, but yeah. Cool. Sorry.
So that's why I tend to use autofit, just because it works with the content I have. The idea then of bringing in the min function inside the min max, I've seen it done. I think every time I see it, I'm like, oh, cool. And then when I try and do it, I'm like, my mind can't figure out what's actually happening, and I don't end up doing it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Steph, but your well, thank you for the stretch break. Your whatchamacallit, small CSS grid thing has that min, and it's one of those things where I don't understand it, but I grab it and I tweak some of the values and it
Oh,
works.
you know what it is? It
It's
prevents
just out of the box.
It stops them from, like, at 15 rem now, if it was to get smaller than that, they would overflow. Whereas the min
Okay.
on there, it would allow it. It's a little bit like we
100%.
used it on our container. We used
That
the
makes
min in
sense.
there.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Got it. Okay. Yeah, and Valola, sorry, I apologize. I'm trying to enunciate it, but says the ugliness of autofit is when you only got one item. If there's pagination, I prefer a constant column. So yeah, it's just cool knowing the solutions to certain problems. If you're seeing a certain issue, it's good to understand the different autofit, autofill sorts of things. So yeah, chat, I appreciate the conversation. This is really cool. All right, where do we want to go from here?
So before we get to the next page, I just to talk a little bit about Flex and Grid and sort of the things they do the same and differently.
Cool.
If you jump back to the page, just so we can look at it in action. It's
Should
something that
uncomment those.
Oh yeah, I guess we can bring them back in. And actually, maybe comment out the last article.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll make more sense.
What we're talking about one then. Now. I mean,
that one's easier. So yeah. So, I mean, even seeing it now, it's a really good example on the difference between Flexbox and Grid, because with Flexbox, you can see those the tags that we did, those bright blue tags we have. It's this idea of the 1D versus 2D layout. To me, and it makes sense because it's the way that they're controlled. So in Flexbox, every row is independent of every other row. And if you change the flex direction, it's the columns. But so like the columns being created on that first row on any of those sets of tags. So if we look like the HTML, CSS responsive UI, they're all different sizes. And then those ones underneath it are just like they're doing their own thing. Right. So we're getting columns with content, but every row has the columns of one row are independent from the columns on the next row. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah. HTML is not lining up with JavaScript, and the start of CSS is happening before JavaScript's even done. So like this is not really a column layout. It's more like, yeah, it's just chaos in a sense. Yeah, but exactly. It's what we want for this, right? Like exactly a grid layout would be too much here. So
it wouldn't work. Yeah, it would be, that's where it would come into this structured grid and look terrible and wouldn't be working. Whereas Grid's the opposite. Grid, they're all following like there's certain cells, right? And that's why that last post, like there's an empty space next to it because we don't have anything to go into that space. And it won't stretch. And if we did this, we could recreate this exact layout with Flex, and then those bottom two items would actually like fill up more space, and they'd be, 50% each instead of the 33 they are right now.
And then it was always frustrating, or you had to do some kind of like max width on them and hope to try to, it was a pain in the butt.
So that's where, for me, like both of them, this is a little bit too of that, like the parent versus the child, which one has the control. Whereas with a grid, we set up our grid. It doesn't matter. You can see like we have a post with like that really long title, more content in it. And then we have the shorter post, like, so the content in each one is different from another, but we set up the grid and those components just have to slot in there. They have they don't have much control over the actual layout that's being created. It's really being defined by the parent, and it's the children that are falling into those cells that are being created. Whereas with Flexbox, the layout is being, in this case, set up by the children. So the children's intrinsic sizing is what's defining how big each one of those things is. We could make Flexbox behave more like Grid, but we have to do a lot more work there. Or we could make Grid behave more like, we can't get that same style going on, but we could get Grid doing more of a Flexboxy type of thing, but we have to do more work to actually get it to do that. And so once again, it's that path of least resistance. Just try and do what's going to work with the least amount of work.
Makes sense. Yeah. And Mark is saying the same sort of thing where they both have their own purpose. It's not that like Flex is dead, it's all CSS Grid now, right? It's no, they do different things. Let's use them for the things that they do. Float. Now Float is dead to me. Float can no. I'm just like,
When's the last
clear
time you used a
fix.
float?
Right. No, I don't have to. I mean, I haven't. So, and I've been happier. I felt good. You know what I mean? I don't know, things have been good. So I think those are related. I think those two things are related.
Yeah.
Yeah, float's good for what it's intended.
Hmm.
I don't see that style happen often, right? Like it's a
Exactly.
very specific. And correct me if I'm wrong. What it's intended for is like, like floating around in image where like the text, like you got a cool image of someone throwing a baseball and you want to like have text go around that image. Neat. I just think of like my high school math books when I think of that kind of like layout. I don't know, for some reason textbooks always love that, where like someone's like
Yeah.
looking at a frog with a magnifying glass and the
And the
text is
text
wrapping
is-
around them, and that's the only place I've ever seen that done. So unless you are doing, high school math book stuff, I don't see a lot of people reaching for float. It certain like designed layouts, like there are some sites that have a lot of that sort of thing. I haven't had to use it really, so I'm happy. I don't know. Grid's good for me. Flex
Yeah.
is good for me. But anyway, great
Yes, I'm happy
podcast,
we don't
great
have to.
energy. Thank you. I'm just griping here. Kevin's teaching and I'm going, you know what else I hate? Yeah, anyway. Cool. What do we want to hit next?
I just saw Valoa mentioning mason. We don't see as much masonry these days. I do get asked about doing masonry style layout still. And now that everyone's shipping subgrid or getting close to shipping subgrid, that is the next spec of grid. The level 3 of grid is a mason. It's grid template rows masonry, and it just works.
Pinterest is back, baby.
Yeah.
They're making their big comeback.
But it'd be nice not to have to rely on JavaScript just to make a layout like that. It's going to be refreshing.
Yeah. Before we move on, I do just want to say and walk back my criticisms a little bit. It is not the tables and floats' fault. I think Chad is kind of saying that. It's not their fault. They were not. They were cruelly used, right? Like they were grabbed and put to work doing a thing that they were never designed to do. So definitely not their fault. We hacked around the limitations of the platform with those tools, and because of that, it wasn't fun. We had to use clear fixes and tables and right, like tables were never supposed to be used for big layout or just any layout, right? Besides tabular data. So anyway, just want to say, float, I forgive you. I just never want to use you for layout ever, ever, ever. So cool. All right. I think we're talking about responsive CSS. Is that
yes.
Yes.
Which we had to do with floats for a long time, and I'm glad we don't. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
So yeah, I guess on that idea is sometimes we do have to have media queries, talking about how we did all that without them. Sometimes we do require to have them, and there's different reasons you might have to. And I guess that's more now where the idea of, we did all of that without thinking mobile first or thinking desktop first. We just sort of made a layout that worked, and it adapts, and the browser's figuring it out. And the more you can do that, and Jen Simmons is really the one who talked a lot about this for a long time, of this intrinsic design and this intrinsic era instead of a responsive era, which was more that media query style thing. And I think the more that we can lean into that, your life is going to be so much better. And there's so much less to worry about, but it's not realistic to say that's every single situation you run into.
Makes sense.
So then you do have to think, is it mobile first? Is it desktop first? Is it, and I've
Go
posted
tablet
a lot.
first, right down the middle.
Yeah,
Tablet
tablet,
first. That's the easiest way. You get both on either side. It's good.
Yeah.
You got to find a middleman.
And I get pushback sometimes because I do talk a lot about mobile first on YouTube, and you do get some people going, well, I'm designing these enterprise solutions that are only going to be ever used on desktop. Why would I even worry about it? And I'm like, well, I'm not talking to you right now. Like, that's not the situation I'm dealing with. I'm looking at making a website that works everywhere.
Yeah.
And then you get other people that say a lot of the time, well, they're given the desktop design first, so they start with that. Or they might only have a desktop design, so you start with that.
Yeah.
And that's where this intrinsic style comes in, where, first worry just about your colors, your spacing, set up your fonts, do all of that stuff, and everything's going to work. And then start building in the layout. And if you just throw your more complex layouts into a media query from the beginning, instead of putting it in your general styles, you sort of do that where you're doing that path of least resistance within your media queries. But instead of thinking mobile first or desktop first, I think it's still like choose the path of least resistance within your media queries. And what I mean by that is whenever we use a media query, there's two ways of doing it, sort of, is sometimes you're overwriting things that happened earlier. So maybe you set font size 1 and then 1 rem, and now you need it to be bigger. So you change your font size to 1.25 rem. And so you're overwriting something. The other, and that's fine because you needed that 1 rem to become 1.25. Right. There's other situations though, where you come and create like a layout. So maybe instead of having our auto fit for whatever, you have a designer who told you, you have to have this very specific layout at this size. You're listening to your designer. So you do the repeat 3, 1FR. And we do that and it works. But now if I want to get this to work on mobile, I run into a problem because now I actually have to go and redefine my grid template columns. So then I make a media query. I can redefine them with my max width. And the issue with that is you're defining something to try and turn that something back to the default value.
Okay. Right.
Right. So if we do it and then you do grid template columns, I don't even know what, I guess you could even just do repeat 1 if you wanted to or whatever. But
hold
on. Do you know how many times I do that? Because I'm so used to nesting my media queries.
Yep.
Yeah.
Same.
And then why is it not working? Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the issue here now?
So leave them as 1FR. But now I don't want to have columns anymore. So is it a repeat 1? Am I just doing like an initial, I need to go back to what the default value was effectively. Whereas at the small screen sizes, so if you put that smaller one to a 1FR.
Got it. Where this is right? This is what the browser ships. Why am I having to set
exactly
this? Is that kind of what you're saying?
There we go. Yeah, exactly. So we put in a layout and now we're trying to go back to what the original layout was at a smaller screen size. That's sort of so that's, we're doing more work than we have to,
right?
Is the idea there. So obviously the solution is instead of, at the beginning, don't even define your grid template columns. So you can delete that completely. Change your max width over to a min width on the media query. And then make that one a repeat 3. And so then it should just work.
Small, it's still 1.
And then it switches to the 3. So now you've listened to your designer, but you're doing, and in this case, it's one, we'd moved 1 line of code. It's not like this huge deal breaker, but from a maintenance perspective, it's easier. Yeah. And this is a really simple example where, you're doing this one little thing, but a lot of the time you end up with you might have 5 properties, and then you're trying to overwrite all 5 of those properties back to what the browser was doing in the first place.
Yeah, that's not great.
And that's the idea where mobile first often wins out, because usually we're adding complexity when we get to larger screen sizes. I did a video a little while ago where I was looking at making a responsive navigation. It was like a hamburger that turned into a regular navigation. And in the video, I used a max width media query, and we'll look at why in a second. But to see it in action, but it's because, actually, let's do it. It'll make more sense. There's a markdown file in there called extra styling.
Cool.
Yeah. You can just grab all the CSS there. I think I only did that. So let's go to there, and you just drop that in.
Just at the end here?
Yeah, it should be fine. And then let's go to the third example now, because that's where I've set up having, I think we should, oh, there it is. Okay, yeah, let's make sure it works. Click the menu. There we go.
Cool.
So we have a mobile navigation that's coming in. Nothing too fancy. I didn't make it look good. I'm sorry.
We're all offended, right, chat? Yeah. We're very angry. Kevin Powell, how dare you? No. So is this button just, it's just working off of, there's no JavaScript working here. It's just, or
oh, yeah. I have a little JavaScript that's going on.
Got it. Okay, cool. I was just curious. Cool.
There are ways of doing that with a checkbox hack type
Right.
thing.
Just wasn't
And
sure.
actually, yeah. I'm assuming it's still the same because I don't think they've redesigned it. Apple actually uses the checkbox thing for their navigation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I was like poking in. I'm like, oh, really? I've never seen this on like a large scale production site before. That's interesting.
Yeah, we've got to look now, right? I mean,
yeah.
so this is for like their hamburger menu.
Yeah.
Spect div. So let's see, where am I?
Are they not doing it anymore?
They might have
Oh, I see a
changed it.
JS thing in there. Maybe they changed it.
Yeah, just curious. I'm not trying to call you out on it. Just
Yeah.
I was curious. Once upon a time.
So yeah, okay. So with this mobile navigation that's coming in, because your designer told you needed one, or you just want to have one, that's fine.
Yeah.
But this is the case where if we go and look at the CSS that I wrote for all of that, and I just did it to speed us up a little bit, but there's a lot of stuff coming in here that doesn't, like, I'm setting a position fixed. I'm setting my inset, which is another logical property that's a shorthand for top, bottom, left, and right. Sorry, that's down a little bit.
Where is
further.
it? Okay, yeah, here.
There, yeah. That's one of those. We keep getting properties. It's like the other way around, where like we have shorthands that like maybe it would be nice not to have a shorthand for it. But I was amazed with how long we went without a shorthand for this. And
yeah. And I don't think a lot of people know about this one either, because I still see lots of people writing out top, bottom, left, right, 0, 0, 0. Yeah, so it's super handy.
And it's also a really good one. The auto keyword in it is as if you're omitting that property. So you're saying like, I'm setting my top, my right, my bottom, and not setting anything for my left. So it's not the same as like an auto margin or an auto other things. So it's kind of nice that you can sort of skip properties with it.
So is that what's putting it over here and not making it take up the full window size? That's cool. Yeah. Nice.
So I have my flex direction. I have my, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there basically that I only want to be applying to the mobile version. And I don't want to have to go and reset my position. I don't want to have to reset or turn off inset, because how do I even turn off an inset? How do I turn off, set my background back to transparent? Maybe my padding is going to be different. I probably don't want a flex direction of column on there. My gap might be different. So there's all these things that are unique only to the mobile that I don't want to have influencing the large scale. So if you're so stuck in this paradigm of mobile first for everything, and I'm 100% guilty of this. I was doing this for a long time. And then I'm just like, why am I overwriting all these things that I shouldn't have to overwrite? So that's where I'd say this is like the perfect use case for using a max width media query of saying these are styles that are only for 0 to whatever pixels. And after that, throw them out the window and don't worry about them.
Got it. Yes, I don't know why I'm going 600 pixels, but let's just stay somewhat consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Also, remind me to ask you about this RGB thing that you've got going here in a sec. So yeah, the button's still going to be there, but it's just not going to be styled in that way.
Right.
But
now is where, if we jump back, I mean, we could refactor it a little bit, just because we could so outside the media query, you could just choose the nav toggle and do a display none. And actually put them before the media query, because if not, our cascade kicks in.
That will, do. Yeah. Travis just gifted some subs. Thank you so much, Travis. Really appreciate that generosity. And Alistair Plays now has a sub. Thank you so much, Travis. Always great to have you here. Not just because you buy subs, but just because it's great to have you. And thank you for that. So cool. So now nav toggle. On a larger.
Now we might need to turn it back. We need to turn it back on at the small sizes, though. That's the only
sense. So now nav toggle, display,
block, inline block maybe, or it's a position absolute. It might not matter which one we choose, but there we go. Just something that can turn it back on.
Cool.
And then maybe we could move the display flex that's inside the media query to everywhere. So if you scroll down, there's one in there somewhere. Oh, that's my nav list. So the nav, or whatever, you can leave it like that and just say nav list is display flex always.
Okay. So
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
too much there if you had one line repeating itself.
Yeah, it's when you have to like just juggle a lot of them, and they're one's canceling the other one out, but then you have to, especially if you ever have like another media query, that's when it gets really, you're like, oh, this is not fun. When you've got like I've got my media query for 1024 and then 960
Yep.
and then 480, and it's just like, oh, grid template columns across like 5 media queries is just not fun. Any property across a bunch of media queries is
Yep.
not fun. But oh, interesting. We're
Oh,
getting
okay. So this is where we didn't see it because it was off screen because there's no padding. So this is actually, let's go back to the media query. We'll refactor it a little bit. If you go down to the, so I have like the list style, none is there. Actually, maybe that's the only thing we need.
list down on that.
So that one could go up to the,
that up.
again, we're not making a super nice, we could throw a gap on there or something, but it's just that idea that it's going to work everywhere. And I think, even talking what you're saying before, when you have lots of media queries, because I kept things pretty simple here. We're not dealing with like 5 media queries as things scale up.
Yeah.
But as much as possible, and it's not always possible. Sometimes you have to overwrite things 100%. But if there's big changes now, like I guess it depends on the situation. If it's a big change, like my navigation looks completely different in these 2 different situations, just try and isolate the one that has the most declarations, almost like try and take all of that stuff that needs to be overwritten, and like the very simple version is my global style, and then all the complicated stuff that's only for this one specific situation gets wrapped in a media query, so it's only affecting that size. And so the media query is almost like additive, so you're adding complexity within the media query. So it doesn't matter if it's a min width or a max width, it's just added complexity there. And then there are those times where you're going from 3 columns to 4 columns to 5, and you just have like a different media query for each one, and it sucks.
That's interesting. So for me, I've always tried, because like I struggle a lot when I start to mix min width and max width within a project. Like for me, I've always tried to just make it so that the project is entirely max width or entirely min width, because otherwise it's back to that like min of 100% kind of thing where I'm like, all right, like I have to like talk it out what it means, where it's like, all right, the max width that this will apply to is at 600 pixels, so that means it's affecting smaller browsers. I always have to do that kind of thing but if I've been in a project for a few days, I don't, because I'm like in it and I understand that this is affecting smaller, but just because I've been doing it. But if I ever have to like hop back and forth between 2 projects that have min and max, it's always like a mind warp for a few minutes.
The one thing that will help, I think, with that is once we get the new syntax for media queries, where we can just use the greater than and less than, or like equal than and greater than, just because same thing. Like the fact that max is for smaller than up to it, like it's backwards. No matter what you do, that first instinct is always the wrong one, just because the word max and the word min, it's annoying on that sense. And I 100% agree that like I think media queries, you need to keep them as simple as you can. And if you're doing like randomly, or you have like lots of different stuff going on, it's definitely going to be a nightmare. I just think that from like a maintenance point of view, this makes sense. And most of the time you're going to be using min width, in my experience. Like it's not often that you have a really complicated thing that has lots of styling with it on your phone that all gets stripped away when you're on your desktop or on a tab, whatever, right? It's super rare. Navigations are just one of those ones.
It's black and white Times New Roman on desktop, but you should see it on phones though. This thing is wild. Yeah,
exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, usually you're just adding complexity in, but if it's when those times where you do have this rare component or this rare thing that happens to be more complex on a small screen, that the max width makes sense, because you're not forcing yourself to overwrite it all later on to reset things.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's great. So Travis, who is building Bedrock Layout, says, wait, greater than and less than is coming?
It's supported in Firefox. I don't know if it's only Firefox Nightly or if it's actually in Firefox.
Is that
You
is
can
that one
also
of the ones you showed to us on the holiday
yeah
special? I believe so, right? Like where you
yes
showed us some future CSS, and that was one that right now with post CSS,
yeah
it's supported, like, because that'll transpile or convert or whatever the word is. It'll turn it
hmm
into stuff that works everywhere. But it's actually like supported in Firefox Nightly is what you
it's
think?
it's at least Firefox Nightly, maybe, and even it's not perfect. The last time I tried it, the base like the greater than less than was supported, and I think maybe like well and like greater than and equal to. And the nice thing with that is really like you're not because if anybody's had like the min like right now we're looking at min width or max width. It's not often, but sometimes you might have that awkward middle ground where you actually have to have like your max width and a min width one, and then you're just
Mm,
like like it's you're really clamping it to like a specific range. But then you have that like weird overlap where like sometimes you need like a 599.999, so like to get the actual right thing, whereas the greater than or the greater than and equal solves that problem.
nice.
And that was one of those stupid little edge cases that you almost never notice, but then you run into something where like there's just no styling at that point zero
That
one.
pixel, and someone has a phone at that
Yeah,
pixel, and it's
exactly.
your
Yeah.
boss, and they're like, "This site stinks, and it's terrible, and you're fired." Yeah, of course. That's how the world works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah. So and Mark just touched on that. Like,
Same, yeah.
is it less than or equal to, because max width includes the value? Bob Mansour
Yeah.
asks, what about the idea of wrapping custom properties for things that need to be overwritten in a media query?
Hmm.
What's the
Um,
wrapping part of custom properties? Wrapping in a media query or wrapping?
yeah, I think putting, I mean, I was going to talk a bit about that. I
Let's go
use
for it.
media queries a lot for, oh, I meant to make, okay, we'll do it on, I was supposed to put that in the, did I put it, go to the extra styling at the bottom? Did I not put it in there? I have a feeling
Actually,
I didn't. No, I didn't. I was going to.
all
Sorry.
good. All good.
It's the idea. I mean, that's getting into typography there
Cool.
a little bit because that layout is not bad, but I find most of the time typography is what actually causes overflows because you get that light. You have your really nice fonts and everything set up, and then you have a long word and a blog post title that just breaks everything.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously the content itself influences the layout. And so like that's another good reason to style your typography early on, is because sometimes you might get your layout looking okay and then you change your font size and things don't look the way they did before. So
Yeah.
um, I think we've probably all run into certain situations with that.
Yeah.
And there's sort of two options when it comes to typography. I know you know them. One of them is Clamp, and Clamp's super nice. And I wish we had it longer, but I'm super happy we have it now,
Yeah.
where we can set a minimum and maximum font size. Which I remember when there's other use cases for Clamp, but that was like the immediate one when I saw it. I was just like, oh wait, that's that just solves so many problems. Um, Now, so let's go all the way up to the top and maybe
Cool.
create 2 or 3 custom properties for our font sizes.
And I do like that. We'll do it from scratch, but I do like that. Open props comes with a couple out of the
It does,
box.
yeah.
But yeah, should we put it in root?
Yep. So we could just create maybe 2 or 3 font sizes here, whatever you want to call them.
I think. Let's go. I'm just gonna do like a prefix because I forget what
Oh,
the
because we have the
open
open
props
props, yeah.
one is, but I want to make sure we're not getting that. H font size 1. What do you think? Like 1 rem, or we're gonna do clamp here, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's true. We're doing, we're mixing them up. That's fine. We'll do the clamp and then we'll talk more about the custom properties
Or
as we go
did you
through.
not want to? I
No,
was
it's fine. It's perfect.
Okay.
It's
Cool.
perfect. Yeah, clamp's perfect.
Cool.
I was talking about clamp and then I confused myself by saying let's make custom properties.
All good.
Um, let's do it for, we'll use that for H1 just so we can see it with the larger font size. It's a bit easier. So maybe I don't know, 2 rem. This is the fun part of clamp, is choosing your growth factor, which is impossible. Let's try like a 5 VW and then I don't know, 4 rem. Is that going to be too big? We'll see what
We will
happens.
find out. And then
That's the one problem with clamp is you start having to do a little bit of experimentation with it.
it's a guess and check for me for
yeah.
sure. Yeah. Do we want to replace this and see
Yeah.
how it goes? Cool. And I just did the H for horse, but it works out if it's for headings. So, I mean,
So there we go. So we can see we have like a minimum font, then it's growing, and then it hits a maximum size. And that's just so nice. One thing I would suggest to improve it slightly is where we did the 5 VW to also bring in, leave the 5 VW, but do like a +1 rem or a +0.5 rem. The only reason for that is viewport units as font sizes are not ideal. When you're doing headings and it's a really big size, it's probably less important. But the viewport width is really locked into the width of the viewport. And so if a user's on, and before we had clamp, you'd see a lot of people just setting font sizes with viewport units. But if you set it with the viewport unit and you zoom in or out, it doesn't actually change the size of the font because your viewport hasn't changed.
Got it. Okay.
Now, again, big font sizes, it's less important because generally speaking, if someone's zooming in, it's for your body text that's smaller and not your big heading to begin with. And even if it's
mess with layout, if one thing is shifting and one thing's growing and another thing is not, that makes things
like it makes things go weird
proportionately. So
with clamp, because there is that min and max on there, at one point, if you're zooming enough, it could hit one of those points and actually start zooming in and out too. So it's a little bit, but to me, it's still nice to have that there just to make sure that, we're following.
So
the hard, oh yeah.
No. You go ahead. I'll ask a question about clamp when you're done.
I was gonna say the hardest thing to know. Again, you're probably following a design. Maybe you're just doing it on your own. But knowing that minimum, maximum value is usually the easy part, and finding good values in the middle and finicking around and playing with that can be really, really hard. It depends. Oh yeah, go.
I keep going to cut. Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Go.
No.
You have questions.
I was just going to ask.
Lead us in the right direction.
I get the min and the max. I don't as much understand what the middle number's doing. You said the growth factor. What's like?
So
how does that apply?
So that when I'm saying growth factor, that's like the size the font wants to be.
Okay.
So the font wants to be, and ignoring the 1 rem that's in there, just because that complicates things a little bit. But the font wants to be just 5 viewport units in size. And again, that it becomes hard to judge what 5 viewport width is because right. But you see it, you set it to 5 VW and you scale and you go, wait, it's too big for 3.5, right. 5.5, whatever. You play with it. So the font wants to be that 5 viewport unit. And so that's why it's adjusting as we're going up and down. But all we're doing is saying that it wants to be that big, but it's not allowed to get smaller than 2, and it's not allowed to get bigger than the 4 or 5 that we put on it.
Got it. So it would be similar to like if this was a width instead, it would be like a min width, a max width, and then like a width of 100% or something. And that's able to like, got it. Cool.
Yep.
Thank you for that. And I'll stop interrupting.
No, it's fine. So there's, you mentioned something before about having everything sort of working together as your layout's adapting. And so that is one of the issues, because if you have different, like if your lower value and your upper value are different, even though that middle value is the same. So you have one for your H1, one for your H2, one for your H3, one for your paragraphs, whatever it is. They're not all going to change at the same sizes because they're hitting their min size or their max size at different times. And it can be like, if you start trying to finick around with that stuff, for me, I don't know, I can't do it. So I'll put it in utopia.fyi.
Yeah.
Which is a nice resource. This is not something I don't think, if you had like specific design that you have to follow, I think it might be hard to set it up to actually work. Their type scale calculator is, so actually, if you scroll up a little bit, there's a down a little bit more. We'll play with the numbers after, but there's a use clamp checkbox right there. It just makes it, instead of the really complicated custom properties that they're using otherwise, that make my head spin, that we can just do it with the clamp. But you'll notice there, like this is for like a fluid type scale that works, and you'll see like all the rem and all the VW numbers that are in that scale are different. And that's like the type of weird craziness that you sort of would have to figure out, which is impossible.
Yeah.
Um,
They're using math here
yeah,
to do
there's lots
stuff.
of math
So,
going on.
yeah.
And the idea with this, and the reason I like this tool is because usually type systems are built on type scales, but usually at a small screen, you have, say, like a non-aggressive type scale. Like the difference between the smallest font and the biggest font, it's not that much, right? Less so anyway.
Right.
Whereas at a large screen, the headings could be like way bigger than the rest of your content. So that's why there you have like a width, a font size, type scale for your min viewport, and then we have a width, a font size, and a type scale. And oh, it's broken. Is that in Chrome?
It's a Windows thing. Happens a lot with Windows. I don't
Yeah.
know
No, I had
why.
the same thing, but I'm always on Firefox, and I assumed it was a
Oh,
Firefox
okay.
thing.
So maybe
Yeah.
it's not just a Windows thing. Windows gets a lot of bugs that
Oh, I'm
people
on
don't
Windows
often
too, so
notice.
yeah,
Oh, got it.
yeah.
So
So
you know what I mean with the scroll
yeah,
bars. Everyone,
yes,
no one knows that there's hidden scroll bars on the
yeah,
website because Windows shows them, Mac doesn't. And yeah,
yeah.
anyway.
But yeah, it's nice that you can actually set like a different type scale for your small size and your bigger size. If people are big typography people, they'd appreciate that.
Yeah.
And if you don't, it doesn't. It's not the end of the world, but it does make it just for a nice. It's a nice little touch that you can put.
Yeah.
But it's really based on your base font size. So they're like, I can only choose what my font size is for like my body effectively at the small size, the big size, and it's figuring out the rest of the scale from there. And I just sort of have to go with what they're giving me based on the type scale and everything. So if you are living and having to work with like a specific design where every font is defined or all your font sizes are defined, you're probably using clamp for everything. It's going to be really hard.
Yeah.
And even for like paragraph text and everything else, maybe it does fit into that whole like intrinsic design type of thing, but I haven't got my brain to be there yet. I tend to like using clamp for big font sizes. So like my big headings that can then like adapt a little bit, and that's
Not
about
be
it.
as obnoxious on a phone. Yeah. But
Exactly. Yeah.
I love obnoxious desktop fonts, honestly. Just like big
Yeah. The
Zell.
oversized.
Is their
Yeah.
name?
Yeah, that's her.
Yeah, their articles. Let's see. Can I read the blog? I really like. Yeah, just big,
Hmm.
big. Like for
Big.
some reason,
Yeah.
when I think of big type, yeah, it's like there it is. But yeah, it doesn't stay obnoxious on phones, right? Like
Hmm.
it scales down nicely. So
Yeah. So that's where instead of using clamp for stuff, I like using custom properties along with media queries for typography. And
okay,
for me, this is where I realized that, and we were talking a bit before about custom properties being a lot more than like Sass variables, and this was where the ball dropped of just being able to redefine your custom properties within a media query. Because anyone who's built like a type system with Sass before, where you had like variables for your small font sizes, then you had a new set of variables for like a medium size, then a new set of variables for a larger size, and in the media query you'd be choosing all your, my H1 is font size XL phone, then it's font size XL tablet, then you just had, it was just this mess of selectors being redefined over and over again.
yeah,
Whereas now we don't have to do that, which is really nice.
that is awful. Yeah, that experience sounds not at all great. So yeah, I get what you mean. Oof.
So yeah, if we go and we can keep, so let's keep that clamp one there. Is there something in the chat? I see.
No, we're just kind of checking the chat. Math. I was told I wouldn't need to use math on the front end, just for linear interpretation. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the nice thing is like if you want something like this, take Utopia, tweak the little property things, but yeah, you don't have to do that because
Mm-hmm.
here that's what I was looking for. That's like the key for me, right? Like where it's like I get to visualize it, and I tend to always need to like add one or two or something up at the top,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I tend to need another one, and then you can adjust it. So is that like the base font size, or
Yeah,
I
that's the
think
base font size,
and then I
and
think this
then
is like the multiplier, right? Of like
exactly.
how much it's going to scale by. So if I want to stay at 18 for my body, but I want like a big difference between my biggest heading and my body, which I think is maybe step -1, something like that. I'm not sure. Step 0 probably. Yeah, like yeah, it's just nice, and it's not a like so many people want to just make it go like by twos, like, right? Like I
Right.
go
Yes.
18, 20, and then my next one is 24, and my next one is 26, and that just doesn't really, like you
Yeah.
can see it, like these jump by a substantial amount each
Hmm.
time, but it looks really good. It makes sense. So we spent a lot of time there already. I won't beat that any more than we already have. So
So yeah, if we just, I don't know, let's create like a font size 2, and we'll just make it, I'm trying to remember what I put my let's just make it 2 rem.
cool.
And then let's declare that on our H2, because we'll actually see that used then. So that should be working, and nothing really looks any different right now. But then what we could do is in a media query. So if we create another one just after the root,
Oh, after, so
I
media
just
query here.
keep them, yeah, just keep them together for now to keep it easy. And we'll do a min width on there. We'll stick with the 600. And then we can just say, do the root again and say the font size, our font size 2 becomes 3 rem, just so we can actually see the difference happen.
Cool.
Usually it probably wouldn't be that aggressive, but there we go. We can see that then when we hit that breakpoint, the font size adjusts. And being able to do that all just through custom properties that we're quickly redefining, and then you just have like that typography system there, and then you're redefining it a little bit and everything can change. To me, yeah, that was a game changer, and just makes it really easy to manage your typography. And then it doesn't even matter from a typography perspective what approach you're doing. So you could be using something more like Tailwind, where it's all utility classes, and then it's sort of more linked with the class. But if you're using custom properties like this, and you like just writing your CSS and having more of a BEM style or something like that, and you're using the same font size declaration in 10 different places, that also doesn't matter, because it's all linked to that custom property. So you don't have to redefine anything. You're just going to that root in the media query, change it there, and it just goes through everywhere that you've declared it. So that type of thing is just super, super cool and super handy.
Yeah, I absolutely find the more I like kind of smuggle my values through custom properties, the easier things become. Where
Mm-hmm.
like if I'm ever setting like 3 rem directly on like my tag as that size of that tag, it's a pain in the butt to repurpose that or whatever. But if everything's kind of abstracted through a design token of a sort, I mean, like even with container queries, you would be able to just update a property if that hits a certain size, right? Like if it's inside a certain component, I want all headings inside call out components to change font size down to this. Like it just gets easier because you can redefine the value of that CSS custom property as you need to.
Yeah. I mean, custom properties have been such a game changer for CSS. And like you said at the beginning, I think we just saw it as like, oh, I one less reason to worry about using Sass, that then all of a sudden has become this completely different way of writing CSS.
Yep.
And even like with even Adam's like open props and other things. And I was talking with him about, because even like he's pushing it a little bit, but now it's even like the idea that you could really come in and build your own system all based on custom properties, and then actually use it like the name's saying, where it's like a custom property. So like you sort of set everything up, and then when you're writing CSS after, you're just like, I want my button background color, so you're just like hyphen button BG. So
Right.
now it's its own, you're doing it on a parent, your call to action, my call to action button BG is a different color or whatever. And like you just, it's kind of cool that
Then you
that's a
change it
possibility.
once. You just
Yeah.
change it all the way back there. Just
Yeah.
flip a switch, and now it's a different color. Yeah, it's really wonderful.
I
Cool.
see Bob Monsieur was asking about needing to declare the root again, or use the root selector again when we had our media query. So that is one of those things with custom properties. They have to live inside a selector. So it doesn't have to be the root necessarily, but just since that's where we defined it, as long as you're globally wanting it to change, that's the selector where it makes sense to do it.
Yeah, like we could even do it just on that H2 if we wanted to only change on H2s, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, we can't just drop it in the middle of this file, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's not
Yeah.
happy. Cool.
And that's one of the, again, I usually have nesting on, so I always forget to put my selector. But then
Yeah.
even when it is redefining custom properties, it just feels like, oh, I should just be able to throw them in there, so that just make sure they're on some selector or another. I do get questions a lot about why is it the root of, I don't have a good answer. It's just, I think, has become the standard because that's how we started doing it.
Got it.
Uh,
It is
I heard,
interesting because
yeah,
like
I did.
I never knew
Sorry.
about root before CSS custom properties, and I
Yeah.
don't use it for anything else. So it's just like that's just where they go, and that's what root's for. Like I don't know.
Yeah, I did a post a long time ago on CSS tricks, and then
I've heard of it.
Chris had asked something in, I think on Twitter, like replying about the post about the root rather than either the body or the HTML. And someone on the Chrome team replied saying that at the time, Chrome was optimized for custom properties that were declared on the root if they were never redefined. Like they had some magic going on that would just speed things up. But that was years ago now, and I don't know. Like I don't want that to, I know they've redone their layout engine, and they're always up. Like the browsers are stupid good at what they do now, and I don't think that if you want it, you could put them on your HTML element or your body. I don't think it would actually
Got it.
have an influence unless you're doing something insane. I think the only thing that's important is not to define them all in the star selector. That's where you can get into a little bit of trouble, even though it's very tempting to do it. Because I'm sure people, if you use custom properties, I'm sure at one point you've run into this issue where you try and redefine one. Like say you set like your color is red and then you declare it on the body, and then you try and just redeclare the, I'm going to get it wrong probably, but then so then I can't redeclare it on a paragraph because the paragraph isn't getting the color from the custom property, it's inheriting it from the body. And then
Because
you're just like,
the star makes it add to everything, and you could
everything.
easily overwrite it with like if you were to put on paragraphs, I want this to be blue or whatever. But if you try to put it on a parent, like if we put on container, that text should be black, but we don't say and the paragraph inside. That paragraph's going to get the thing from the asterisk. Where
Yeah.
otherwise, it would cascade down because there's nothing inside setting that CSS custom property again. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that the thing that I really like about open props is the way that Adam is setting them. And I know this is getting really off topic, so I apologize.
That's fine.
But
No worries.
I don't even see them here. Are you using the just in
Yeah, go
time
up a little
engine?
bit. No,
Oh,
go
so
up. They're right
there we
there.
go.
Yeah.
But like he sets them on like
I
in a
have to find
really
the selector
interesting
now.
way. Yeah, is this on a special selector? So is this
They
all
should.
of
Oh, I'm not. Oh no, wait, I'm not using them. Oh, they are. He is using where?
where
Yeah.
HTML. So this makes it so that like they are as faintly declared as possible, and they're super easy to override. They have like a selector level of like -1 or something, just like as I forget what he said, but it's just like they're
It's
yeah.
and I didn't bring in the normalize that he has, but the normalize is the same. Everything done in the normalize is styled with the where selector. So basically, like you can you can so easily overwrite anything just because it's there. Like
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about if he did a class selector or anything else because you can use your element selector, whatever. And the where is super cool for that.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Do we want to hit anything else?
Let me double check my notes, but I think we covered all the big
Awesome.
topics that I wanted to talk about.
Zero specificity. Thank you, Cynthia. Yeah, I know Cynthia has been using open props a bunch in her teaching, so
Nice.
that's super cool. This is where at property will make it cool. You can have inherits false. Oh, neat.
I'm really, that's one of those ones, the property that I'm waiting for other browsers to start supporting it before I dive deeper into it, because I played with it a bit and I was like, this is so cool, but it's only Chrome at the moment. And I don't want to get too excited about something that I can't do too much with because I don't know where it is anywhere else at the moment.
Got it. Okay.
But it opens up like a whole new door to, like, custom properties are already amazing and it just makes them better.
I need to look into it because it rings a bell, but I'm not positive. Like
Yeah,
I
so
don't, I'm not sure what it is.
it's I mean, it's an at, you do at property, and I don't know the syntax exactly, but it's like at property, and then you name it. So it's a little bit like a custom property, I think. But what it is you can set a few different things on it. So you can say the thing with custom properties is they can be anything, right? You could say red, you could say a number, you could say a string. It can literally be anything you want.
Right,
With
right.
at property, there it is. Okay, so yeah, you can say what it is. So is it a number? Is it a string? Is it a color?
Oh,
Does it inherit an initial value and stuff? And because you can do that, this is like the one I played around with was animating background gradients, because a gradient is a background image. We can't animate background image, so
right.
you were stuck. But what we can do with this, and then with custom properties, you can't generally add, because the if you use custom property for your background gradient or background linear gradient, let's say, you still can't animate those right now because it doesn't know what they are, so it won't allow them to be animated. But if you did this and you said, color red, and then your syntax, you tell it's a color's an animatable property. So now that custom property becomes something that can actually be animated. So instead of having to like
Oh,
move background positions around, it
yeah.
opens up the door of actually being able to animate things that weren't possible before.
Oh, that's cool.
And there's
Man.
more than just that. That's me, like, that's the one
Yeah,
thing that I played around with, but you can do
right.
more than just that with them. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Man, that I can wrap my head around. I still need to like understand Houdini a bit because that's still way out there. But anyway, that's totally off topic. But
That's not for me to teach you on. Someone will someone else have to. Every time I see someone playing around with it, I'm just like, wow, cool. But yeah, that's
we
something else, like you
we did
said.
have George Francis come on to teach us a little bit about his paint spec
Yes.
CSS Houdini. Yeah, so like that's the amount of CSS Houdini that we've gotten here. But that was really cool to see that just how the worklets and everything work. I don't know. But yeah, chat, if you are new here, we're always doing CSS creative coding kind of stuff here. So yeah, follow, I guess is what I'm saying, or stay away if that's not your thing. If you're not into that, if you are trying to look for a Valorant streamer, I'm warning you now. We do lots of web dev stuff. So thank you for that follow. But yeah, Kevin, it's been an absolute blast to have you on again. I don't want to cut you off. So was there anything else that you wanted to touch on before before I let you go?
No, I think we covered everything. Yeah, just I guess a quick recap is just try and let the browser do as much as it can on its own without you having to worry about it. And just yeah, the whole idea of the least resistance possible. And the more code we write layout wise, the more issues it's often causing. So just try and keep things as simple as you can. It's easy for me to say and look at an example like this sometimes that we were looking at that wasn't like this. We're not doing a big complex thing with like these components that have too many details or whatever it is. So I get, you might be looking at this going, well, I need to get something more complicated than that. But for a lot of the stuff we do, you can keep things relatively simple and try and just lean into the browser as much as you can.
Yeah, no, I think that it's a really great message to just not like try to do less, right? Like try not to make it so that you've written yourself into an unresponsive website because like just that mindset of the default is responsive. If it's not responsive, you've done that, so see how you can undo that, right? That's a mindset that I haven't had, so I think that's really important to I,
And
I so rarely start with a blank site, so like just seeing one is like a good refresher of like, oh yeah, browser's kind of good at this, right?
yeah, and it's definitely hard to even like think in that way at all because again, the mock-ups that we're often building off of they don't work that way, right? You're
Yeah,
given a static thing, so it's hard to go, okay, like instead of building that static thing, you have to sort of go like, okay, how I have this and I have that, and we have this whole in between, and just like what's the best way to do that without trying to match exactly what I have here? How can I have it adapt and how can I have it move? And just, but knowing that that has to happen instead of just going, okay, I'm going to build this and then figure out that next part later.
yeah,
That I think is where it's easier to run into problems, but it's also the intuitive way to go about it at first.
Yeah.
right? So I get why that happens.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Oh, yeah, Brent, thank you for dropping the Discord. Really appreciate that. Dropped your website just a second ago, and you have a phenomenal YouTube channel. If no one, if no one here, if there is someone here who's not following Kevin's
Hello
YouTube,
and welcome to my channel.
I brought it up, and everyone just heard you say hello and welcome to my channel. So that wasn't this Kevin. That was previous in time Kevin. So just he's not a ventriloquist. That was just the channel thing happening. But yeah, phenomenal YouTube channel. Just a great teacher. You've got a bunch of courses. Kevin, yeah, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate all that you do for teaching CSS and just making us all a bit better at what we do. So thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It was a lot of fun. And
Yeah.
if anyone has any questions about CSS or anything, whether it's on Twitter or the Discord or anything else, I'm on your Discord as well, so ask me there. Whatever it is, I enjoy nerding out on CSS. So yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Cool. Well, chat, we're gonna find someone to raid, so hang around. And yeah, we will see you, I believe, Tuesday, because we have our great friend Cassie Evans coming on the stream. Let's actually bring that up real quick. And I already said we're leaving and stuff, but let's actually just pull that up, because Cassie from GreenSock and from, Code Panel, all over, you've seen her everywhere, is coming on to teach us about a GreenSock plugin that's coming out, and we might get a little sneak peek at it. So Tuesday, March 29th, be here. Once again, follow if you're not already, so you can know about this. And then we also have the fantastic Andy Bell coming on to teach us about fluid typography, space layout, so more responsive goodness. He's going to get a bit more into stuff like Utopia and those sorts of things. But he's got his own thing, and he's phenomenal. So
he's amazing. Yeah, I've learned so much from Andy. So I hope
he's great.
See you.
Yeah. So we've got that coming up next week. But until then, take care, everybody. Have a good one. See ya.